So it seems that the time of the Dark Gods is at hand, with a brand new book for Chaos Space Marines with 8 detachments and a whole load of cool new rules. Let's do a full review of the Codex, talking about all the new ways to play, and all the changes that have happened to the units. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Chaos Space Marines, and in this video we're doing a full review of the whole Codex, talking through all the mainstream rules content, with every rule from all the detachments and everything that's changed on the datasheets. For the most part I feel like the Codex is going to be one of the better ones out of 10th edition. On the face of it, they look like there's multiple very interesting detachments for building armies in different ways, though it's perhaps a bit more of a mixed bag on the datasheet changes. There do seem like a few ones that are going to annoy people in one way or another. A couple of major downgrades and some lost war gear options, though there's good stuff as well as bad. For an overview of the contents, Chaos Space Marines has all the things that you'd normally expect out of a 40k codex: lore and miniature galleries, crusade content, and the combat patrol rules for the new one with the possessed and the cultists. Plenty of other interesting enough stuff beyond the actual core 40k rules, though that's what I'm going to be focusing on today. For the mainstream 40k sections, they've got their Dark Pacts faction rule, risking damage and displeasure of the Dark Gods for being able to hit the enemy unnaturally hard. Some rules for the Cult Marines, so adding Khorne Berserkers, Noise Marines, and things to the army. A big 8 detachments in the book, which is more than any other single codex so far, though I guess technically Dark Angels can access more at the moment, given 3 of their own and all the ones out of core codex Space Marines. All of these follow the same pattern as we're used to seeing: a core detachment rule plus 4 enhancements and 6 stratagems apiece. The general flavour is that there's 5 ones that broadly represent legions, 1 that represents raiders and corsairs, 1 that represents Daemon Engines, and 1 for a more mortal feeling army with a bunch of chaos cultists and other lost and the damned. Then of course there's all the unit rules. Previously in the index there were 49 datasheets in Codex Chaos Space Marines, now it's down to 48 of them. There are 2 new ones in the Return of the Jump Pack Lord and the new Cultist Firebrand being fielded solo. 3 of them have gone away though. Lucius and Noise Marines will be in a digital index, the Exalted Champion has been removed, and the Chaos Cultist lost a full war gear loadout, which I think will be annoying to many. For this review I'm not going to be focusing on the printed points of the Codex whatsoever. I will cycle back to it in its own section, but in general the short version is that Games Workshop will publish the digital points for their Codex completely separately in a couple of weeks, and the printed version tends to be woefully out of date and just isn't really worth paying too much attention to at all. Loads to talk about though, so let's jump in. We'll start out with the army rule and the supporting rules, then go through the detachments, then go through the gained and removed units and the rest of the datasheets. First up, we've got the core rule for Codex Chaos Space Marines, which is Dark Pacts. Generally I think that this one's quite a fun one as Warhammer 40k core rules go. The idea is that each time your Heretic Astartes unit tries to attack the enemy, if they want to they can call upon the power of the Dark Gods, though given the fickle nature of Chaos they might get more than they bargained for. Basically you can trigger this whenever you either shoot or fight. Pretty much all the units actually within the Codex get this, and then if you use the Dark Pacts then you get to either get lethal hits or sustained hits when you attack the enemy. The usual math for that applies. If you're wounding on a 4+ or better, then often sustained tends to be the way to go. If you're wounding on a 5+ or worse, it's often better to go lethal hits. It is quite powerful and certainly nice enough to flex into lethal hits whenever you need it when you're targeting something that's a lot tougher than your guns would usually be able to handle. But it does come at the risk of taking some damage. You roll a leadership test and you do this before you deal damage now rather than after. If you fail that leadership test, then you still get the advantage of either the sustained or lethal hits, but before your unit does damage you take D3 mortal wounds, so you might well lose models that then never get to strike. The chance of that at least is fairly low for most units. The majority of your core Chaos Space Marines get leadership 6+, and that means that there's usually just a 27% chance to fail that test. Roughly on average around about half a mortal wound per activation. Usually it does tend to work out as well worth it, even if you might occasionally lose models. It is slightly nerfed since the index, seeing as you might well be taking that damage before you get to deal damage, but still good enough overall, definitely very impactful. I do quite like the way that there's a little bit of risk and reward here, plus a bit of chip damage might hurt some units more so than others. It's not really the end of the world on a big vehicle that would otherwise be intact. Chaos icons play into this, allowing you to re-roll the test. That's perhaps going to be more important given that you take the damage before now. As previous, the Slaves to Darkness detachment, which is now rebranded as Pactbound Zealots, that allows you to get some boosted versions of this with their marks of chaos. Overall you will have to use a bit of discretion as to whether or not it's worth the risk, but I feel like for most units, most of the time it is going to be worth it, unless your damage output is going to be super pitiful beforehand and not worth having the last few wounds of your squad wiped out. The other core rule for the faction is the Cult Marines. This one's now called the Cult of the Dark Gods rule. The shorthand version of this is that you can spend 1/4 of your points on the raised Cult Marine datasheets, so Plague Marines, Noise Marines, Khorne Berserkers, and Rubric Marines, and use the datasheets from their respective codexes. The deity-specific ones, the deity ones for World Eaters, Thousand Suns, and Death Guard, and the soon-to-be-released digital index for the Noise Marines. That's where the rules are going to be living until Codex Emperor's Children is going to be released, almost certainly late in 10th edition. These guys are handy for their datasheet rules, and they will get the Heretic Astartes keyword, which does mean that you can target them with certain stratagems. The bit that they don't get is Dark Pacts though, as they have to have that on their datasheet to be able to access that, so you can't have Plague Marines getting sustained hits or things like that, for example. That's not the only allies that Chaos Space Marines can bring though. They can also ally in either one big knight or 3 war dogs, or take a quarter of their points in summoned demons. Chaos Space Marines basically do have some of the best allied rules out there. Chaos Knights could be handy enough for a few extra gun turrets like War Dog Brigands, or for some fairly savage melee machines in War Dog Carnivores. And Chaos Demons are often particularly useful for allied Nurglings, giving you a really cheap scouting and screening option to start in the midboard, or maybe Deep Strike for secondaries for just 40 points. Let's get into the rules proper though, and start out with those detachments. As mentioned, there's 8 different detachments in Codex Chaos Space Marines, and they do have the normal themes for Warhammer 40k ones. None of them actually lock out any units, so you could technically take any army and field it in any one of these. You're just more incentivized to take certain units and choices depending on the stratagems and core rule that the detachment give you. Each of them give you a core rule, 4 enhancements, and 6 stratagems, and here's the list of the ones on offer. Running through them briefly, we've got the Deceptors. This one is Alpha Legion flavoured with infiltration shenanigans and supporting some ranged infantry. Renegade Raiders, which is kind of Red Corsairs themed, fast moving objective takers with bikers and transports being a bit more supported than some. Chaos Cult for your mortal followers. That's a detachment for everything in the book that isn't a Space Marine. Veterans of the Long War is the Black Legion themed one for generalist Chaos elites and not for the cultists and hangers on. The Fellhammer Siege Host is basically the Iron Warriors flavoured one. This one makes the Chaos Space Marines super durable and supports a few more ranged tactics. The Dread Talons is the Night Lords one, infantry and a whole load of battle shock tactics. Pactbound Zealots is Word Bearers and is reinterpreting the Slaves to Darkness Index detachment with Marks of Chaos. That one has unfortunately taken a few nerfs since the Index one. And finally we've got the scary Soulforged Warpack for a bunch of Daemon Engines in service of Vashtor, being able to make boosted Dark Pacts for massive extra damage and a bunch of stratagems to support them too. Overall, between the lot of them, at least a few of them look really quite interesting. I feel like there's enough strength to draw you to try out multiple ones of these, and I do quite like that for this codex there's quite a few options for more general purpose detachments, where you could have a fairly balanced Chaos Space Marine army and play it in different ways. There's plenty of codexes where you really haven't had that choice so much, unless you go very heavy into certain units within the codex that you might not have in an average collection. Let's jump into it properly though, and we'll start out with the sneaky Alpha Legion Deceptors. This one has all the shenanigans you'd expect for an army of the Cult of the Hydra, and starts out strong with an interesting infiltration themed rule called Masters of Misdirection. As with the rest of the detachment, this would swap out for the mark system that you usually have with the previous Slaves to Darkness. So bear in mind that in these detachments, a lot of the Chaos Space Marines might not be hitting quite as hard, though you still get your basic issue Dark Pacts. This Massive Misdirection one could put a fairly scary amount of stuff in the midfield right from the word go. Basically, per battle size, as per this chart, you can put legionaries or cultists into infiltrate. At a 2000 point strike force game, it's 3 units of each. And on top of that, if you had any characters that can attach to those as well, they can join the unit as well, just not epic heroes. I feel like 3 units of each infiltrating it is actually perhaps surprisingly generous. Means that you could put a fairly scary number of models and bodies in the midboard if you want to. Basically have all the objectives held by Alpha Legion operatives straight away, though it does mean that a lot of these units will be easier to catch up with and engage compared with if you started them a bit further back, so infiltrating is something that you might often want to do in moderation as opposed to en masse. It is really quite nice to get very cheap infiltrate units though. It's not something that Chaos has access to much besides Nurglings. You could do big move block things with enormous squads of cultists going up the enemy from turn 1. And Legionary squads certainly can be really quite scary in terms of damage dealing, particularly if they're backed up by a Chaos Lord and they're re-rolling wound rolls on objectives. You could potentially do some pretty fearsome turn 1 charges with this if you wanted. Overall seems like a really nice rule, and definitely one that you could play a bit differently depending on opponents. Getting into stratagems, and they have a fair few really quite good ones, I think. For 1 CP, we've got Detonator. If you destroy a non-Titanic model with Deadly Demise within 18 inches of one of your characters, that Deadly Demise automatically triggers if you spend this CP. This one harks back to previous versions of the stratagem that they've had. Very, very nice just to scatter mortal wounds over the heart of the enemy army, and might be one that's actually worth the setup of trying to make the character go up close and then destroy that vehicle with some heavy weapons. Even for a D3 explosion, if you could catch say 5 or 6 units within the blast range as you might be able to early game, that could be something like 10 or 12 mortal wounds right there. Certainly scattergunned over a whole bunch of enemy units, but at the same time that's still quite a blow. It really could be pretty massive as well if there was anything that wasn't Titanic that had D6 mortal wounds. For 1 CP, there's From All Sides. This one's a battle tactic, and at the start of the charge phase you nominate 1 unit. That unit gets +1 to charge for every other Chaos Space Marine unit that successfully charged this phase, to a maximum of +3 overall. If you are going full in into melee this turn, it means that 1 unit should get a pretty spectacular boost into combat. Could theoretically be used for a big charge out of reserve if that's what you want to do, but otherwise just charging a lot further than your opponent might expect. For 1 CP, there's Pick Them Off. This one I initially misread, but basically it's a damage buff against enemy units that are more or less injured. You get to reroll hit rolls if you're shooting against an enemy unit that's below starting strength, so say a vehicle that's taken a wound or a squad that's taken a casualty, and it goes up to reroll all wound rolls as well if the enemy is below half strength. I say this one's usable enough. It's kind of rare that you're going to be lucky enough to be shooting against something that's below half strength that also critically matters, though if you are then this will help I guess. It's a bit easier to trigger those full hit rerolls. Seems like okay value for 1 CP, though probably not standout. Otherwise, for 1 command point, we've got Coils of Deception, a nice simple fall back and shoot. Nice to have, ensuring certain big firepower units don't get locked up. It's certainly good for infantry units like Havocs or Obliterators that might have their firepower tied up. Pretty helpful for vehicles as well, meaning that you can then focus fire the rest of their units and avoid the penalty for big guns never tire. For 1 CP, there's Relentless Pursuit. This one's a reactive move one for an infantry or mounted unit. In the enemy movement phase, if they finish a move within 9 inches, you get to move your unit 6 inches. This one's generally always handy to have, I think. Good for scary threat units in the midboard, means that you might be able to pull them back out of line of sight for enemy shooting, jumping behind terrain suddenly, or potentially backpedal from enemy charges, meaning they might be charging an awful long way and fall short. Finally, for 1 CP, there's Scrambled Coordinates. You have to declare this at the start of the enemy's reinforcement step, and it means that enemies can't set up within 12 inches of your nominated unit. I guess this could be quite a big one if the foe's got lots of reinforcements coming in and you have something big that's screening quite a lot of the board. Could be kind of nice if they've got limited opportunity to drop anyway, and this could close off a key gap that you've maybe left uncovered. Or even if you had a great big cultist unit strung out towards the front ranks of the army, that could potentially ward off a whole load of options for the opponent to bring in their reinforcements. You would need to think quite carefully around this one though, as you definitely want to actually use it and make sure that you're blocking off somewhere where your opponent absolutely would want to drop. As if you get it wrong, you could just be throwing CP away here, when they might not have been planning to even set up their unit this turn anyway, or had no plans to drop it in the place where you're screening out. Overall though, for the most part, I think that's a pretty strong set of stratagems. Reactive moves and longer charges are always handy to have. Fall back and shoot will certainly come up, though maybe it's not super powerful. Pick them off could be handy if you can scrape a bit of damage off something, and then you're about to hit them with something really big, and that detonator one just seems massively good fun. Might be worth having some long-range anti-tank units that can threaten to trigger that if there is a conspicuous vehicle in the centre of the opponent's formation. Finally, we've got the enhancements. The simply named Falsehood one is an interesting one where one of your rank and file can step forward, revealing themselves to be something much more. You use this with a Chaos Lord that isn't a Termi Lord or a Jump Lord, set it up in reserve rather than on the board, and then in the reinforcement step of one of your movement phases, one Legionary or Chosen model is effectively destroyed, replaced by the scary Chaos Lord, who steps up into the fray, no doubt to give the enemy a good smacking with a Demon Hammer or similar. You can't use it to make some sort of weird doubly attached units by adding another character to them. You could only use it on a squad that doesn't already have a character attached. And I feel like it's kind of interesting to keep the enemy guessing where the Lord will pop up and potentially stop them from killing the Lord before he gets to swing and attack them. I think it is kind of fun, though I do kind of wonder how much use it really is in practice. The opponent will still know that you've got Legionaries or Chosen there and still recognise them as a big threat. Plus, using this does cost you a model that you would have had otherwise, and that's not nothing. Seems like one that's kind of fun though, just for sheer fun factor, having some guy step forward and announce I am Alfarius. Otherwise, we've got the Cursed Fang. An infantry model gets a better AP by 1 and precision in melee. That one's okay if it winds up being cheap enough on the final points. I wouldn't want to pay a lot for that though, given that precision's situational. The AP is good but not enormous. Then we've got the Shroud of Obfuscation, giving you the access to another lone operative. An infantry model gains stealth and the lone operative keywords, which is kind of fun. Means that you could potentially have really quite a fast moving lone operative in a fighty jump pack Chaos Lord. I guess the question would be whether or not having that lone operative is better than Cypher, who got a lot better in my opinion, at least in terms of his raw stat line. Though I guess having a fast moving jump pack lone operative is often something that's kind of desired, particularly as they are pretty fighty in close combat. Finally, there's Soul Link. An infantry model can trigger this once per game, and it basically borrows their abilities from across the board. They gain the Psychic keyword, plus replace their datasheet abilities with the other character's datasheet abilities for that turn. I guess in theory it means that you could have, say, a Dark Apostle flex into the Chaos Lord abilities for the extra strength and damage and the free stratagem and things. Overall, maybe doesn't seem awful, particularly if you've got lots of infantry characters on the board. Again, it maybe feels like one of the ones that might be a bit more fun and tricky as opposed to being super strong in practice, I guess. Seems kind of fun though. Let me know what sort of combos you'd think about using that with in the comments. Overall though, broadly I think that the Deceptors detachment does look pretty fun. You could absolutely flood the mid-board with loads of objective scorers early on. I feel like most of the stratagems are usable and useful, particularly the reactive move one, and plenty of the others seem like they're really good value situationally. Next up, and talking some Corsairs, we've got the Renegade Raiders. This one seems to be the one that's mainly Red Corsairs themed, maybe having a few parallels with their rules back from 9th edition. Their core rule this time round is called Raiders and Reavers. Ranged weapons gain the Assault keyword, definitely good for keeping things moving around quickly. Nice for any gunline unit as well, meaning that they might be able to get line of sight a bit better or get in range. Could be nice for shorter range things like Vindicators or slower things like Havocs. And there is an advance and charge stratagem here as well, which means that you could potentially have units move, advance, shoot, and then go on to charge. Could be nice for anything with mixed threats like Terminators or Bikers perhaps. The other bit of the rule is an AP boost against enemies that are on objective markers. You get an extra pip of AP against anything that is on a marker, and that is almost guaranteed to come up a fair few times in the game, given that you're usually spending most of the time fighting over objectives. This one works both at range and in melee, and is going to be very nice for any slightly lower or mid AP things, and certainly great against anything with super high saves like Armour of Contempt, Dreadnoughts and the like. Overall, I'd rate this as a pretty solid passive faction rule, a nice bit of extra speed and a bit of extra damage to a few key units. To back that up, they've got some very nice stratagems as well. For one command point, there's Unfailingly Obdurate. This one's a slightly awkwardly named Armour of Contempt equivalent. You pick one of the non-damned units in the army, so that's the regular Chaos Space Marines, not cultists, and you worsen the AP of enemy attacks coming against them for that phase. Basically what Armour of Contempt does, it tends to be pretty great on 2+ armor saves and in cover, and it is a battle tactic, so you could get it free with a Chaos Lord. Quite a nice one, definitely one that you could use many turns in a row and get good value out of it. For 1 CP, there's Scour and Seize. This one allows your units attached to gain precision if they're within range of an objective marker. Situationally, this could be pretty amazing for sniping out a key character in a unit, maybe taking down an enemy Chaos Lord, Space Marine Captain, or a Pain Boy perhaps. It's generally going to be best if you didn't think you were going to be able to wipe out the entire squad anyway, and it really is the character that you need to focus on taking out that's going to be doing all the damage or providing a really nasty buff. Definitely just want to keep in mind, along with Epic Challenge, these guys are going to be extra good at headhunting characters as the game goes on. Next up for 1 CP, there's really quite a nice one called Opportunistic Raiders. You use this at the end of any fight phase, either yours or your opponent's, and then you select one of your units that was eligible to fight this phase. They can then make a normal move of 6 inches or 12 inches if mounted, or they can fall back. And you can use these moves to embark in a transport vehicle, but only if you haven't disembarked from one earlier in the turn. This one's really quite a powerful one. If the opponent's charged you, you could use it to fall back basically, and then get your unit to act completely fully in the next turn. They could shoot themselves and then go in to charge the enemy that they were just in combat with, or something completely different if it made more sense. Otherwise, could be a way that you could get more bodies on objectives if it's going to make the difference, or maybe use it at the end of your own fight phase to have struck the enemy in combat and then hide behind terrain from enemy return fire. Lots of ways in which this could have some big value. I feel like again this is definitely one that could see a lot of play. Then for 1 CP we've got Warp Charged Engines. A transport or mounted unit gets to auto advance 6. Given that you can advance and shoot, it means that you could get some lines of sight with this, I suppose. Maybe a little bit limited in the units that it can actually affect though. For 1 CP there's Ruinous Raid, which is a battle tactic. This one allows you to reroll hits and wound rolls if your unit disembarks from a transport and you target an enemy unit on an objective, and you can do that shooting or fighting. This one's maybe a little bit specific, but feels like it's encouraging you to do a little bit of mechanized infantry, something that Chaos Space Marine lists were definitely doing a fair bit before. This seems pretty nasty with Chosen, for example. You could be re-rolling all hits and wounds after jumping out of a Rhino and just butcher something on an objective in the midfield. I guess it's quite nice for Legionaries, though if they're targeting things on objectives, you already get the wound reroll. Very nice for Terminators and things out of Land Raiders as well. It could be massive for them. This one also doubles down on the core detachment rule as well, where you get AP -1 against units on objectives, so that's going to be a fantastically nasty combat if you can catch something important that way. Finally, for 1 CP, we've got Reaver's Haste. This one means an infantry or mounted unit gets to advance and charge, and they get +1 to charge things on objectives as well to go even further. Advance and charge is generally very helpful to have, means that you can make some really long charges away, and even more so with the +1 to charge that you get. As mentioned, this could be really nasty, along with the shooting that you can get after advancing. Could be great on Terminators to move, fire off a whole bunch of combi bolters and things, and then charge into combat, or the same with the bikers. If you were feeling spendy and spent 2 CP on this and warp charged engines, you could have the bikes move 18 inches and still get to both shoot and charge. Overall, between all this, I feel like this is a pretty fantastic set of stratagems for just general purpose Chaos Space Marines. Lots of them could be used turn on turn quite reliably, and a couple of them are really nice situational ones that depend on exactly how your units wound up fighting what in close combat. Then finally we've got the Enhancements. Despot's Claim is a command point generating one, a 5+ chance to gain 1 command point each command phase, going to +1 if the bearer is wholly within 12 inches of the enemy deployment zone. This one seems absolutely fine for a character heading out towards the midboard to fight with the enemy. If you do have such a character though, you'd be weighing it up against Dread Reaver. If you fulfill the same criteria for this one, and you get wholly within 12 inches of the enemy deployment zone, you get to reroll all hits and all wounds for the bearer in melee. Maybe the first thing that comes to mind for this one could be a Demon Prince, perhaps. A whole bunch of mid-strength attacks seems really nice there. If you had a winged Demon Prince, then that could be really quite scary in terms of the sheer murder it could put out, maybe jumping out of rapid ingress. Does seem very nice on something like a standard issue Chaos Space Marine Lord as well. Rerolling hits and wounds pairs very nicely with Demon Hammers. Then we've got the Mark of the Hound. This one is a nice simple scout 6 inches for the bearer's unit. Definitely fits in quite well with the rest of the theme of the detachment there. Means that you could get a unit into the midfield nice and early. Potentially means that for something like a Jump Lord with a bunch of Raptors, you could be doing first turn charges fairly easily with that. That's be 18 inches with an advance and then 1 command point to allow them to charge. That's going to be enough to hit basically what you want really quite early in the game. Then finally we've got Tyrant Slash. This one allows you to re-roll advanced rolls and you can fall back and shoot. Kind of an interesting enough mixed one there. I guess being able to move around a bit quicker isn't the worst in the world. Maybe it could be handy for a Terminator squad perhaps, if you wanted to re-roll advances and then go on to advance and charge for 1 CP. The fall back and shoot thing might occasionally be alright. Out of these, I feel like the command points, Dread Reaver and the Mark of the Hound are probably the first ones I'd be most tempted by. Just all around though, this detachment seems like a very strong one. Assault weapons and extra AP are great. There's a good selection of stratagems where most of them are really quite scary, and the enhancements are pretty fine as well. All of this when combined with Dark Pacts does look like there's a pretty fantastically dangerous Chaos Space Marine army in this somewhere. Next up, let's take a look at some mortal followers in the Chaos Cult. This one's quite a fun Lost and the Damned sort of themed army. After a few Kill Team releases, there's quite a lot of non-Chaos Space Marine units within the Chaos Space Marine army. These have all been united with a new keyword called the Damned keyword, and it has things like the Dark Commune, Accursed Cultists, Traitor Guard, Felgor Beastmen. the Traitor Enforcer, the Cultist Firebrand, all alongside the standard Cultist mobs, though notably Spawn don't get this. I guess they started life as Chaos Space Marines. The core rule for this one is called Desperate Devotion. You can use this on any of the damned units with a Dark Pacts ability when they're selected to make a normal or advanced move or they declare a charge. It's basically kind of like Dark Pacts but for extra movement. You essentially take a different sort of style Dark Pact called a Desperate Pact. If you fail that leadership test, then you get D3 mortal wounds in the same way, but instead of getting a damage boost, you instead get +2 to the move characteristic or +2 to your charge rolls. Potentially it means that you could both trigger that in the movement phase and the charge rolls, and have an overall big threat range of an extra 4 inches on the board compared with what you'd have otherwise. Given that a bunch of these guys have kind of low leadership, you might not want to do this literally every turn unless you do desperately need that extra movement to maybe make charges or get to objectives. If not, you might just be better off preserving a few more bodies on the board and advancing normally. It does look like Desperate Pacts don't follow the same sort of rules for Dark Pacts, so I guess technically you wouldn't be able to re-roll this with Chaos Icons, which kind of feels like a bit of an oversight perhaps. And this one's specifically not permitted out of reserves, otherwise you'd be able to get a 7-inch charge out of strategic reserve, and it seems that that wasn't the intention for this rule. Overall, it feels like a helpful enough rule for screening chaff moving around the board quite quickly to get where they need to be. And you can take a few more of them in this detachment, as you can take more Traitor Guardsman squads than normal. They gain the battle line keyword, and cultist mobs have it already, so that's quite a lot of individual mortals there. I feel like the core rule might be most helpful for Accursed Cultists though, as it could be used to try and propel them into combat really quite a long way away. Moving on to Stratagems, and for one command point we've got Infernal Sacrifice. You basically sacrifice D3 wounds of your squad and have to take a further Desperate Pact, so you might take another D3 if you fail the leadership test there. Either way though, your unit gets +1 attack for the ensuing combat, and they also gain +1 strength if you didn't fail the Desperate Pact. So potentially a fairly fighty Accursed Cultist unit I guess, given that they'd be the best users of this. +1 attack per model, and also maybe +1 strength as well if you weren't unlucky. It does feel maybe like it will be a bit borderline though, versus the amount of mortal wounds that you might take for this. Otherwise, for 1 CP, there's Chosen for Glory. This one's another quite nice damage boost one. You make a Desperate Pact in the shooting or fight phase, potentially on top of any Dark Pacts that you might have been making as well. You get to re-roll the hit roll for your unit either way, and if you happen to pass that Desperate Pact test, you get to re-roll the wound roll as well. I feel like on the face of it, this one maybe seems a bit nicer for the Accursed Cultists at first glance. Perhaps a slight bit more reliable damage than the first one, though I guess if you really wanted to, you could combine the two. I guess for ranged units, the scariest thing that you'd use it on would be a squad of Traitor Guardsmen. They have to take 3 different special weapons now, but I guess re-rolling hits and wounds could make some hits land fairly reliably, though given that they're still just basically one squad of guardsmen, it doesn't feel like it's going to be overpowered or anything with this. Next, for 1 CP, we've got Selfless Demise. Each time a model in this damned unit is destroyed, the enemy takes 1 mortal wound on a 6 in the fight phase. You would have to kill really quite a lot of chaff for that to be really all that relevant. If you're wiping out a 20 model unit, then you're only taking around about 3 mortal wounds, so it's not exactly the highest yield in the world. Maybe just could be nice if the enemy's got like 1 or 2 wounds left, and this could give you a good chance to actually destroy them, and that could be important somehow. Feels like quite a niche one overall though. Next, for 1 CP, we've got Crazed Focus. This one's a shooting buffing one, and it means that your damned unit gains an extra AP in the shooting phase. If they didn't fail the leadership test on the Desperate Pact that they need to take, then they get +1 strength as well. Again, this one's sort of limited by the scope of units that you can use it on. Maybe if you could double up on the Traitor Guardsmen, this could get a bit more efficient, but again, when there's just 10 of them and 3 special weapons plus some lasgun equivalents, it's just not really adding up to all that much. For 1 CP, there's Reckless Hate. This one allows you to advance and charge for a damned unit. Could be quite nice for Accursed Cultists that don't have a Dark Commune in play. And particularly if you did fancy risking Desperate Pacts in the move and charge phase, you could have a unit charge a pretty phenomenal distance with this. Again, could be nice for Accursed Cultists catching something that doesn't want to be caught, or maybe just a unit surging across the board an unlikely distance when it's a late game objective play. Finally, for 1 CP, we've got something for the Chaos Marines using the Cultists as Mortal Thralls. Basically, you use this with a damned unit blocking shots to a Heretic Astartes unit that's within 3 inches. The enemy unit that's shooting that Heretic Astartes unit must also need to be able to see that damned unit as well, so it would have to be things that's kind of close by. When you use this stratagem, basically these shots get intercepted after the enemy makes successful hit rolls, And then you take mortal wounds equivalent to the number of damage that the Heretic Astartes unit might take, all of that caught on the Mortal Thrall's damned unit themselves. It does mean that, say, if they were hit by something really big like a las cannon and took like 6 damage from it, that could just be 6 cultists just dead in one hit. I feel like on paper this one seems interesting. I guess if you had a big squad of 20 cultists for 100 points, that could tank an entire round of firepower for some very valuable Chaos Marines moving up the board in the open. It might be enough to put off enemy units from shooting at that squad, but I do just kind of think that just the sheer amount of damage that that's going to do to the cultists in a very short space of time probably means that it is still worth shooting at the Chaos Space Marines, even if it's just a fantastically efficient way to clear out your screens. Feels like it could be fun if this is going to be the difference between a Space Marine squad living or dying. Seems like it could be nice for winning some incidental confrontations around the board, but maybe not the biggest one for just trying to march up some scary damage dealer behind cultists. I'm just not sure that's going to be the most efficient thing in the world. Overall, though, I do think there's some pretty interesting stuff here. I think perhaps my favourite one might be Chosen to Glory for potential reroll hit rolls and wound rolls. You might take some casualties, but that is going to add up to some fairly serious damage between that and Dark Pacts, particularly for things like Accursed Cultists. Advance and Charge, and I suppose the +1 Strength and Attack one seem alright as well. I feel like anything shooting related is going to be just a little bit underpowered just due to the limited units that you can put it on these days. We'll get onto it into the datasheet section, but basically the Chaos Cultists lost their special weapons that they could take. If you could take 20 strong Cultist units with a bunch of special weapons, this just feels like it'd be a lot more interesting. Finally, we've got the enhancements. These are all either for Dark Apostles or damned keyword units only. One of them can only be taken by the Dark Apostle alone. First up, we've got Incendiary Goad. This one gives you +1 strength if you're below starting strength, and +1 to attacks if you're below half strength. Again, seems kind of reasonable for Accursed Cultists overall. There's a somewhat high chance to be below starting strength given Dark Pacts and Desperate Pacts flying around. Having them starting off the bat at +1 strength isn't the worst, and I guess it means that if the enemy doesn't quite wipe the squad, then you might have a fairly savage bunch of models left to do a last gasp of damage. Next up, the Amulet of Tainted Vigor is Dark Apostle only. This one allows you to revive D3 damned models in the bearer's unit. That happens in the command phase and can't be used on character models. Could be pretty big on Accursed Cultists, where you could have that reviving more tanky torments, I guess. The Accursed Cultists lost the automatic regeneration that they get, but if you go along with a Dark Apostle rather than a Dark Commune for them, they could have it back if they wanted. Can be pretty helpful for just putting a few more models on objectives or getting them even closer to their charge targets, even more so than the detachment movement rules. Next up, we've got the Cultist Brand. This one allows you to re-roll advance and charge rolls if the other models in your unit are damned models. Again, like much of the rest of the detachment, seems to be about moving chaff across the board very quickly. I think if my math's right, then between the core rule and the stratagem for advance and charge, your average charge threat range will be around about 22 inches or so with this, so near enough one deployment zone to the next. And finally, we've got Warped Foresight, Scout 6 inches keyword for the bearer. That means that you could have either a Dark Apostle or a Dark Commune join a Accursed Cultist unit that's scouting into the midboard. The Accursed Cultists get Scout, but they wouldn't be able to if they're joined with a character that doesn't have that keyword. Again, seems pretty reasonable for something like a Dark Commune. Get the tough chaff into the centre of the board. Overall, I do feel like there's some pretty interesting stuff here. It does seem to be very fixated on movement, and for a few of the good abilities, you do have to be risking taking mortal wounds really quite regularly. Feels like you certainly need to build around the cultists to basically hold the objectives and move into position and keep the enemy pinned back repeatedly. Though besides that, I think you'd still need to back them up with a fairly solid amount of core Chaos Space Marines units to handle any tough stuff that the cultists can't hurt. Even with all your buffs in play, it feels like the Accursed Cultists aren't going to do much more than scratch the paint of certain tough units, so maybe back them up with something like some Chaos Vindicators or similar. My first impression is that it's probably not going to be one of the stronger detachments just due to the datasheet limitations and most of them being very low threat. I guess if you're taking this, it's probably 3 big units of Accursed Cultists to start with, attach a character to each of them, and go from there. If that datasheet is overcosted when the points come out though, then it doesn't look like this detachment is very likely to be any good at all. Next up, we've got some Black Legion flavoured Veterans of the Long War. This one's representing the Shock Elite of the Chaos Legion, a few rules that hark back to more standard Space Marines rules with their Codex, and most of the rules in the detachment excludes damn models, so this one is very much about the Space Marines, not their cultist hangers-on. The core rule for the veterans is their focus of hatred. This one basically amounts to Chaos Oath of Moment. You select one enemy unit in the command phase, and your entire army of Heretic Astartes besides Dam units gets to reroll hits against that unit. That was really quite a powerful damage boost, as it is for the Space Marines. Just take one unit and you can have your entire army queue up damage against them. It tends to be most helpful against armies that have one big central durable unit, and then you can really focus fire and they can take everything you have to throw. It is pretty nasty to stack that with Dark Pacts as well, means that you could be having lethal hits against that same unit, or sustained hits if it made more sense. Potentially for certain units with lethal hits it might make sense to reroll everything that isn't a 6, if say you were wounding them on a 6 already. Overall, kind of hard to go too far wrong with this, it just means that one of the enemy units should die a bit easier each turn. Moving on to the stratagems, and first up we've got Black Crusade. This one affects infantry and mounted units, but not damned ones, as it allows you to shoot after advancing or falling back, plus any bolt pistols, bolt guns, and combi bolters gain devastating wounds when you do. This one basically feels like it's almost 3 different stratagems tied into one. Falling back and shooting is all very nice if your units get locked up in combat and it makes more sense. Being able to advance and shoot is often useful, as it means that you can keep up maximal speed towards objectives and still get firepower, or maybe get line of sight and still shoot. And the bolted devastating wounds thing I think is alright. For things like legionaries, I think it's unlikely to be very good, but I guess could be alright on say a bigger unit of bikers or a Terminator unit perhaps, maybe particularly if you just needed to shave 1 or 2 wounds off a very tough target to bring it down in the shooting phase, and then maybe the unit could charge something else in the assault phase. For 1 CP we've got Let the Galaxy Burn. This one allows you to ignore cover when shooting, and torrent weapons gain an automatic 6 attacks each. This one's not allowed to be used on Tzeentch units, I think to prevent it being used on Rubik Marines, where it would be kind of overpowered on their Warp Flamers. I'd say this one's a little bit so-so. You would have to be affecting really quite a big and scary unit to have the Ignores cover be worth it enough for 1 CP. I guess maybe it could be worth it if you're targeting something that's like an enemy unit with cover and armor of contempt and a high save and things, and this is your best bet to destroy it with one really big anti-tank strike. I feel like you would have to be in a fairly optimal situation where it's really going to be good value though. For 2 CP we've got Endless Ire, which is nice but also expensive. It's 2 CP to basically switch your Focus of Hatred rule to another unit once you destroy the first one. Seems like on paper it could have some good value. Maybe you plan for 1 unit to be destroyed in the shooting phase with your gun line focusing on them, then 2 command points can switch that round to something that you can charge with your scariest melee threat, and again you can get some full rerolls to hit against them, maybe wiping them out with a whole bunch of Possessed or Chosen or something. Does seem quite nice, but 2 CP you can often do some pretty powerful things with elsewhere. And for this one you do also have the restriction of having to nominate your new target within 12 inches of a Heretic Astartes character, which might complicate matters a little bit. I guess perhaps if you did have a Astartes character with a unit that they were going to charge, then you could nominate their target as your second option. Seems nice, but at 2 CP it doesn't seem like one that you'd use every turn. For 1 command point we've got Contemptuous Disregard. This one's essentially Armor of Contempt once more. Can't help but think that maybe it would have been a good idea for the Chaos Legions to agree on one name for their Armor of Contempt rather than having different ones. As ever though, worsening enemy AP by 1 for a phase is pretty good. Nice on big 2+ save units, good on Terminators, and just generally helpful for power armor and cover. Again, this one will be an easy one to use, and it's a battle tactic for Chaos Lords as well. For 2 CP we've got Bringers of Despair. This one harks back to the Terminator formations of the Black Legion. This one gives you fights first against the enemy unit that's your current focus of hatred. This one seems like it could be absolutely huge if both you and your opponent have just one single big unit that are going to be making contact with each other. You could potentially try and set this up where if they charge you, you'll be getting to strike first and also get 4 rerolls to hit when you do so. Certainly would need a little bit of forethought and perhaps sacrificing your focus of hatred, which you could use better elsewhere. Seems that this one could be massively powerful, though it is a massive investment one as well. Finally, for 1 CP we've got Millennia of Experience. This one's an infantry or mounted non-damned unit that gets to do a reactive move of 6 inches when enemies move within 9, kind of similar to the Alpha Legion one. Again, like there, it's always a powerful option. Potentially that could affect big scary infantry units in the midboard like Terminators, Possessed or Chosen. You could have them hiding behind terrain to strike next turn, or recoiling from enemy charges, so rather than you getting charged in your turn, you'll be doing the charging next in yours. Overall, I'd rate that as at least a fairly interesting set of stratagems. I'm not sure if it's quite the same sort of raw strength as the Corsairs themed one. The reactive move and the Armour of Contempt equivalents seem like they'd come up quite a lot and be generally useful. The big 2 CP ones both are potentially great, though cost 2 CP, so you will be sacrificing other options for them, and then the other two shooting buff ones seem alright, but maybe not use every turn sort of alright. Finally, for the veterans, we've got the enhancements. First up, there's Warmaster's Gift. The bearer gets 5 plus critical hits against the current focus of hatred, meaning that you could get really quite a lot of scary lethal hits or sustained hits on the go there. It is just the bearer though, not their unit, and this one's Chaos Lord only. It seems alright, a nice little extra, but is also dependent on your Chaos Lord fighting the focus of hatred unit, which I'm sure will happen sometimes, but it might not always necessarily be the optimal target. Next up, we've got Eager for Vengeance. This one gets you fall back and charge, and apparently while you're doing so, you get +1 to hit your focus of hatred unit and a +1 to charge against them as well. A bit of a weird one, that one. You do get some good buffs, but only when you're falling back, so the setup's a bit weird. I guess the fallback shoot and charge isn't awful to have for a unit skirmishing in the midfield. I feel like buying in these sort of ones pre-game, though it's kind of a gamble. A lot of games they just won't really come up too meaningfully. Next, we've got Eye of Abaddon. This one gives you a 4 plus chance to gain 1 CP each time your focus of hatred unit is destroyed. Seems like a fairly safe bet that this one should give you at least some command points over the course of the game. It's probably not going to be loads though, because some turns you might fail to kill it, and at least half the times you're going to fail that roll anyway. Feels like a nice enough one to have if you've got a safe-ish support character that's likely to survive the game, I suppose. Finally, we've got Mark of Legend. Once per turn, you get to reroll a hit, wound, or save for the bearer. That could be nice on something like a Chaos Lord or a Demon Prince, I guess. If you add that to the Foot Demon Prince, they really have quite a lot of innate rerolls built in, and any sort of save on a 4 plus invulnerable save or a big armor save could be really quite a nice boon as well. It's once per turn, so you could potentially use it both in your turn and the enemy's. I think I'd rate all of these as usable enough, but not standout. Will depend a bit on their overall cost. Any that are cheap could easily be worth filling on, potentially just as points fillers. The reroll one seems kind of nice enough on just about any character that's got fairly good damage and defensive stats. Overall seems like an interesting enough detachment to me. A big punch of extra damage from the core rule is pretty cool on top of getting dark packs. The stratagems seem helpful enough, particularly Armour of Contempt and the reactive move. Being able to get yet more damage by redeclaring the focus of hatred seems fun enough as well. And most of the enhancements I'd say are alright, but maybe not super impactful compared with some. Iron Warriors next, and next up we have the Fellhammer Siege Host. Their theme detachment really embraces Iron Within, Iron Without. Their core rule is Iron Fortitude, and this one's kind of big to have army wide. Basically, it's -1 to wound for all non-damned units when the strength characteristic of an enemy attack is greater than the toughness characteristic of the model being attacked. This rule is at least fairly common in 40k, often seen on bodyguard type units, and it is genuinely a very good durability boost. Typically, just in the game in general, most weapons are going to be most efficient against things that they're wounding on a 3 plus, maybe better. So anything that was wounding your target on a 3 plus, you'd get effectively a 33% durability boost against that. And that's pretty crazy to have across an entire army, even if it won't affect literally every single interaction in the same way. Overall, it is really quite nice to have army wide, and I guess in some ways it might actually incentivize you to have some lower toughness units in your army, maybe things like Terminators, Possessed, or Legionaries, which are still pretty tanky, but then the rule's likely to come into play a bit more. It's still definitely going to be relevant on vehicles though, say if you had toughness 10 tanks being wounded on 3s by las cannons, then this will come up nicely. Moving on to stratagems, and for one command point we've got a battle tactic called Persistent Assailants. You can trigger this in the fight phase if you're fighting after one of your units has been attacked by something else in the fight phase, and it means that you get to reroll all hit rolls. On top of that, if your unit was also below half strength as well, you get to reroll all wound rolls as well, so potentially really quite nasty if the enemy hits you hard, causes some casualties, and then you come back swinging. It is a bit situational on the setup though, but could be big on the exact right unit. I wouldn't say this is one to rely on too often though. For one command point, there's Brutal Attrition. This one is a non-damned unit that gets selected as a target in the fight phase. Each time an enemy attack is allocated to your unit, you get to roll 1d6 to a maximum of 6d6 total. For each 4 plus that you roll, you deal 1 mortal wound. This one seems like a nice enough one if you've got a unit that's just about to get hit very hard by a whole ton of enemy melee specialists. Sort of feels like the equivalent of the grenade stratagem. You'd average around about 3 mortal wounds, could be a bit higher or lower. Nice enough if you're killing an enemy elite or two with that. For 1 CP we've got Pitiless Carronade. This one allows you to shoot an enemy unit below half strength and get critical hits on a 5+. I'd rate this one as kind of niche. The damage buff is okay but not spectacular, and below half strength is something that you need to put in significant work to do in the first place. It won't never come up, but I feel like you're going to use this in the minority of games. For 1 CP we've got Point Blank Destruction. This one's a battle tactic one, and it basically gives all of your ranged weapons the pistol keyword for 1 unit in engagement range. This excludes blast weapons, but it does mean that you could have something like a locked up unit of Havocs or Obliterators just blaze away in close combat. Maybe more useful for perhaps some Terminators bogged down with a bunch of enemy chaff. And it could be interesting enough for vehicle units still, even if they can fire. It means you'd be ignoring the big guns never tire penalty with vehicles. Again, feels like this would come up from time to time, but it is sort of dependent on it not being a good idea for your unit just to fall back. I feel like most of those previous ones were a bit mediocre, but the really good stratagem for this detachment is 1 command point for Steadfast Determination, 1 CP for a reactive 5+ feel no pain to your units being attacked in the shooting phase. This one's absolutely great on things like tanky vehicles, having something like a Vindicator tank in the middle of the board, getting the -1 to wound against las cannons and things, and getting a 5+ feel no pain against anything it does fail a save against is big. The same for a big block of Terminators perhaps. You're going to have to do a lot of work to try and take those guys down. This does feel like a stratagem that's probably worth using just about every turn. Finally, for 1 CP, there's Siegecraft. This one's -2 to charge for your nominated units. You declare it at the start of the charge phase, and it's not cumulative with other negative modifiers. This one's a really nice one if your opponent's got units that are, say, something like 6 or 7 inches away, odds on to make a charge until you get this. Sometimes making or breaking a charge could be the difference between you losing an entire unit, and diminishing the odds can definitely be worth it for 1 command point like this. It's really good for charges out of reserves as well. Overall, I'd say that a fair few of those stratagems are maybe a bit mediocre really. The one that I do really like is the Feel No Pain one. Seems like it's already going to add quite a lot of strength to a Chaos army overall, with the -1 to wound basically army-wide on stuff that wounds it well, plus also reactive Feel No Pain on the thing that matters most. Finally, for enhancements, we've got Iron Artifice. This one's an infantry only one, and it gives you the anti-vehicle and anti-fortification 4+ keywords. Feels like this one might be most used on something like a Chaos Lord with a Demon Hammer. That means that you'll get devastating wounds on anything on a 4+ when you hit vehicles. It is maybe a shame that it excludes monsters from the buff though, given that that's the other flavour of tough stuff, and you might not necessarily be fighting against vehicles. The Bastion Plate I think is a very good enhancement. This one's a Chaos Lord on foot or in Terminator armor, and you get to change 1 failed save per battle round to damage 0 for their units, so this one can be used to affect the rest of the squad, and it seems pretty much guaranteed extra durability for the squad. Really nice for Chaos Terminators or Chosen in particular. If you get hit by something like a nasty las cannon or a plasma gun or something, that's going to be guaranteed wounds back on their unit, even after they've got through the other barriers to damage, like the -1 to wound and good saves. This one seems near enough auto-include, even if it works out being expensive. Next we've got Warp Tracer. 1 unit shot by the bearer can't gain the benefit of cover this phase. Definitely a nice debuff just to have randomly be able to flog out against the enemy. Maybe good for a Terminator Lord or a Sorcerer perhaps. It's kind of a shame that for the Warpsmith their weapons are so short range, otherwise they'd feel like the logical place to put this. Ignore's cover is really good though, can certainly be helpful to help out a gun line. Would be really nice to be able to throw this against a big tough unit with a higher save that you're just about to light up with a bunch of Predator tanks or Vindicators. Finally, we've got Ironbound Enmity. The bearer gets +1 to wound enemies while he's on an objective, a nice enough fighty buff for most characters, good for things with power fists or demon hammers that might be wounding tough stuff on 5s. Could be fun for a demon prince maybe with a whole bunch of strength 8 attacks, that would work quite nicely. Again, doesn't seem bad. I think that out of these ones, my favourite is probably the Bastion Plate though. Essentially this should mean that you basically get, for guaranteed, 1 Terminator or Chosen back to life, at least compared with what you'd have otherwise, and potentially if you get to use it for a few turns in a row, could be far more. Overall I feel like it's a really interesting detachment. I certainly rate the biggest sources of strength as the 5+ feel no pain stratagem, the core rule, and maybe that Bastion Plate alongside some tough elites. Just seems interesting that you could have an unusually durable Chaos army here. They're still going to be doing some fairly nasty damage with a bunch of Dark Pacts. Let's talk about the Dread Talons detachment though, and we'll start out with the core rule. This one's the Night Lords themed detachment, and it seems that the core rule is about battle shock, and then for the rest of the supporting rules they're largely quite infantry focused. I guess the Night Lords being a bit more focused on infantry versus vehicles and war machines, and as expected has a little bit of support specifically for jump packs. They do like their Raptors. The detachment shares the name with the Chaos Battle Force box set that comes out alongside the Codex. That one's very Raptor and Cultist heavy, mostly infantry, which largely seems to be the most useful things for these guys. The core rule of the detachment is called Terror Descends. This one seems like a bit of a combination of Chaos Knight style leadership rules. Enemy units within 12 inches are going to be -1 when they take Battle Shock tests, and they also get one of those rules where you have to test Battle Shock if your units are below starting strength. So that means if any multi-model unit has taken a casualty, or any one model unit has taken any damage whatsoever. Between those, it means that if you've got units up in the enemy's face, more units are going to be testing Battle Shock, and they're going to be more likely to fail that test when they do. In general, I'll admit, as leadership debuffs rules, this one isn't the worst, though I do think it's far better against some armies versus others, and basically anything that relies on leadership too much is always going to be a bit random. You certainly might have lots of enemies failing tests from time to time with this, though it might not be the units that are most important. And occasionally a unit that you really need to fail Battle Shock is just going to pass it and roll super high, even if you stack lots of debuffs on them. If the game is somewhat close though, and you've got a bunch of units skirmishing over objectives, perhaps being damaged but not destroyed, this will occasionally lead to flipped objectives, things where the enemy was holding them, and then because they suddenly fail Battle Shock, it's now yours. Maybe a bit more often against tanky armies where they've got some big tough units that are likely to be damaged but not destroyed outright. Hordes often tend to be a good example of that, but any really big single model units or big Terminator Death Star type things, they might find themselves testing a bit more often. It could be quite nice with any other leadership debuffs, such as Raptors getting -1 leadership, that could stack with the detachment rule. Overall, I'd say it's not unhelpful, it will hand out a bit more battle shock, but it's often going to be applied a bit random and scattergun, and doesn't really add more raw strength, just gives you a bit more chance to deny the enemy victory points or gain some for yourself. Moving on, we've got the Dread Talon Stratagems. For one command point, we've got Depthless Cruelty. This one's a battle tactic one. And this one gives you an extra AP on melee, but only against things that are either battle shocked or below half strength. The actual ability in itself is handy enough. Occasionally, extra AP is worth it in melee, particularly against high save things such as maybe Terminator equivalents. The restriction on this one is kind of annoying though, and just means that you can't really rely on it all that much. I feel like if you just had it 1 CP for an extra 1 AP in combat, it'd be alright. You wouldn't really want to use it all the time anyway, but the fact that it's locked only to certain targets means that it's just often not going to be an option whatsoever, and between the two I think it's going to be very niche indeed. For 1 CP, there's Bloody Example. This one happens if a Heretic Astartes kills a character in the fight phase. This one means that any other enemy units within 12 inches have to test Battle Shock. This one does seem kind of worthless unless they change the Battle Shock rules around. Usually you'd be killing enemy characters in your own fight phase, not the enemies, and that just means that they'll be Battle Shocked for the end of your turn and then just immediately recover it, or have to test anew again at the start of their turn, so it's only going to be relevant for things like end of turn secondaries, or if you get lucky and kill an enemy character during the enemy's own turn, which often isn't going to happen. I guess you can take a look whenever you do kill a character, if there is actually a chance to maybe score yourself a secondary, or stop the opponent contesting an objective that you could score. I guess you could have a go for it, but again this one seems broadly kind of terrible, unless Games Workshop changes the core way that Battle Shock works somehow. Next up for 1 CP we've got Pitiless Hunters. This one again is a battle tactic. This one's far better than the first two. An infantry unit when shooting gets 2 reroll all hits and wounds if the enemy is either battle shocked or below half strength. Again, there is the requirement to go for certain targets. Again, you're not going to be able to use it on the exact units that you want to that are fully intact and haven't failed Battle Shock, but at least for this one, the payoff does feel worth the setup. Rerolling all hits and wounds is a pretty phenomenal damage buff, particularly when you're throwing Dark Pacts into the mix as well. Seems pretty great for the most fearsome shooting units around, maybe Obliterators or Havocs or something. I guess occasionally it could just be incidentally useful on things like a whole bunch of Terminators with combi bolters and things perhaps, but perhaps the most obvious way to use it is to see if you can battle shock something in the enemy army and drop a whole load of Obliterators in to just completely delete it with this. Otherwise, for 1 CP, we've got Relentless Terror. This one allows an infantry unit to fall back and charge. Handy enough, and it will come up from time to time. Would have been a bit nicer if it was fall back, shoot and charge, of course. Will be quite nice for things like fast moving raptors and warp talons, means that if they're just nuisance charged by something, it's not going to stop them. They can just fall back really quite a long way and charge something completely different, moving through the enemy ranks quite quickly, and quite nice for assault units in general there. For 1 CP, there's an interesting one called Screaming Descent. This one is a 3-inch deep strike one. The Chaos Jump Pack units can deep strike within 3 inches of enemy units but can't charge, and furthermore, one enemy unit within 6 inches has to immediately test Battle Shock if that unit is either infantry or mounted. In general, having a 3-inch deep strike stratagem is pretty helpful. It will get things where they need to be for secondary objectives and things. The Battle Shock could be alright in this detachment. I guess deep striking a bunch of raptors just next to it and making them test at -2 leadership immediately could be one way to hand out some reliable Battle Shock. That is going to cost you just to throw units next to an enemy unit and spend a command point though. And even then it's not like you're guaranteeing the Battle Shock even goes off. I feel like perhaps this one it just isn't going to be as exciting as it is for some other factions. Just because the Chaos jump packs don't really have all that much shooting to them, the Raptors can get a few special weapons I suppose, but it's maybe not quite the same as things like Genestealer Courts throwing loads of demo charges at you, or Grey Knight Purifiers burning you up. Still could be handy enough though, putting a big block of Raptors or Warp Talons somewhere where the opponent can't really deal with them properly could be nasty, though perhaps compared with some it's maybe not quite as useful given that they do have some good movement when they're on the board. It is usually helpful to have those though, occasionally you can swipe objectives or basically auto-complete secondaries. It just feels like you're paying a command point and maybe a slightly non-ideal unit to do so is the only problem. Finally, for 1 command point, we're ending with a good one in Merciless Pursuit. You select one of your infantry units that's within 6 inches of an enemy unit that just fell back. Your infantry unit can then immediately try and charge that enemy unit, though as with things like Heroic Intervention, you count as having charged but don't get the charging bonus for things like Fighting First. This one's not always going to come up, as if the enemy can fall back and wind up greater than 6 inches distance away from you, then you might not be able to use it at all. But a lot of the time that just might not even be possible for a standard enemy unit that moves 6 inches, unless they can literally fall back directly away from your force. They just might not be able to get clear, particularly if you've got some melee Chaos Space Marines on both sides of any one model. In that case, you're probably not going to be able to escape from them, and they can just jump straight back into combat after they've fallen back. Against certain armies like gun lines, that seems incredibly disruptive. You could do some clever things like charge one unit and pile into the next potentially. It does maybe feel like a bit of a gotcha one though, probably just to make sure that the opponent's aware of before the game. It's certainly going to mess with their positioning either way, and sometimes they might not even be able to escape it. After the stratagems, I'd say that they maybe feel a bit hit or miss here. A couple of them just seem so niche that they'll very rarely come up. The reroll shooting thing is quite nice, and that one feels like quite a nice Battleshock dependent one. At least the payoff is strong enough to justify it being kind of rare to use. Otherwise, Screaming Descent could be handy for secondaries or some things. Relentless Terror will come up from time to time, and Merciless Pursuit feels like low-key one of the very best out of them. It's a pretty powerful trick to pull, to basically have a spectacularly high chance of locking the enemy in melee, if you can make sure that you can wrap at least part of their unit somewhat. Finally, for the detachment, we've got the enhancements. First up, there's Warp Fueled Thrusters. This is the one that allows a Jump Pack Lord to jump off the board at the end of the enemy turn if he's not in engagement range. Kinda nice to have the thought of a unit hopping around the board. Could be useful for secondary objectives and things, or getting charged on things they couldn't otherwise reach. Though I guess Raptors, Jump Packs and Chaos Lords do have fairly good movement in the first place. You would have to commit at least a fairly points intensive unit to doing that, I suppose. Next up, we've got Knight's Shroud, which is given to a non-Terminator Chaos Lord, and their unit gains stealth. Could be handy enough for a big squad of Legionaries or some Raptors, I suppose. Might depend a bit on the final points cost when the points download is out. Next up, we've got Willbreaker. This one hands out a Battle Shock test to one enemy hit by the weapon in the fight phase. Again, that tends to be fairly awful if it's in the fight phase, unless they change the way that Battle Shock works in some way. A lot of the time they'll just go on to heal it next turn. And then finally we've got Eater of Dread. This one's a command point farming one. You generate a CP on a roll of a 5+, and then you get a bonus to the roll, adding 1 per Battle Shocked enemy unit on the board. Probably going to be unlikely that you generate them round 1, but round 2 onwards hopefully you should be getting at least a few units Battle Shocked, and if not, probably things are going quite bad for you anyway. This one doesn't seem terrible depending on eventual cost. You might rustle up a command point or two regardless, and a few Battle Shocked units are likely to add to it. Overall, I feel like the debuff rule is interesting enough. Probably my favourite stratagems are the reroll hits and wounds when shooting, plus the jump back into combat option. Out of these enhancements, I feel like it's the warp fueled thrusters and maybe the command point generating one that seem interesting enough. Stealth could be alright too, I suppose. None of them really feel truly game changing though. It doesn't really initially look like it's going to be one of the strongest out of the detachments at first impressions. I feel like some of the options work well, though a few of the stratagems just feel super niche and won't come up that much. Next up, let's get into the Soulforged Warpack though, the detachment that's focused on Vashtor's followers and support for the Daemon Engines vehicles. It seems that most of the buffs here are mainly for demon vehicles, though a few of them are helpful for more general Chaos Space Marine vehicles, and there is an interesting stratagem here to allow one of your normal vehicles to become a demon as well, which could allow it access to this core rule. The core rule for the detachment is called the Debt to the Soulforged, and the way it's worded is that when you make a Dark Pact, you can choose to do something which is invoke the contract that the Daemon Engine has no doubt with Vashtor himself, drawing on some extra power from the deity of blasphemous machines, but at a small price, which might mean that there's better chance of you taking damage from the mortal wounds. It sounds like you can just do Dark Pacts normally, but you can opt to go for the boosted version, which is called Invoke the Contract when it makes sense. That means that Dark Patch will have -1 to the test, so it's a slightly higher chance to take mortal wounds than you'd normally do. But I guess it's only going to be the chance of failure going from a 5 or less to a 6 or less. It is an increase, but not a catastrophic one, I think. For all the benefits, though, it does legitimately look quite scary. If you've used it in the shooting phase, then your ranged weapons get +1 to wound, which is all very nice. If you use it in combat, then it's +2 to the attacks and melee weapons equipped by the bearer. Both of those do look well worth using at that kind of price, and particularly when it's already stacked aboard the other buffs that you get from the Dark Pacts with the sustained or lethal hits and things. The +1 to wound looks really quite good for things like Venom Crawlers with their spammed anti-infantry style damage, or Forge Fiends with their mid-strength things that could be really helpful against things that are say toughness 11 or 12, and the amount of guns that Devilers can pack are kind of interesting as well. It might mean that the sustained hits might be a little bit more preferred out of the Dark Pact benefits, given that if you're doing lethal hits, then you bypass the wound roll. And it does seem that you could be using this on things like the Lord of Skulls as well. Seems like getting +1 to wound on its two big scary guns could be really nice too. Otherwise, the +2 attacks in melee is nicely general purpose as well, probably most interesting and most obvious with Mauler Fiend straight away. Having then jump up from 6 attacks to 8 attacks is kind of nasty, never mind any sustained hits that you've got on top of that. It looks like they'd be truly devastating, and they wouldn't even need any other investment from stratagems or anything to get that kind of murderous threat. Overall, it looks like an adequately powerful detachment rule to be interesting. That extra chance of taking the mortal wounds isn't nothing, but it isn't absolutely enormous or killer either. I feel like there's going to be a whole load of situations where it absolutely makes sense to be invoking that contrast left, right, and centre. Moving on, we've got the Soulforged Warpack stratagems. First up, we've got Desperate Rage, which is a battle tactic one. This one is an extra AP buff. If you're using your contract, then you get an extra AP -1 with your demon vehicle's attacks. So I guess you could have things like Venom Crawlers going up to AP -2, or Forge Fiends with their plasma cannons getting up to some very serious AP. I feel like there'll be plenty of times when that's well worth using. Things with their 2+ save in cover, maybe things that use Armor of Contempt or similar. Sometimes an extra pip of AP, if it's making the difference between the enemy saving on a 3 or on a 4, could be a massive boost to your damage output. For 1 CP, there's Glut of Souls. This one triggers when a non-Titanic demon vehicle unit kills models in the fight phase. Each model that you slay gives you a 5+ chance to restore a wound to your model. So say if you slew 6 enemy models, then you'd be regaining 2 wounds on average there. In my opinion, just a little bit on the niche side, even if you are going in with a whole load of attacks. I guess probably the best time to use this will be something like an injured Mauler Fiend slamming into an enemy horde. You couldn't farm things from Tank Shock from this as that happens in the charge phase, but I guess if you got 8 attacks with the Dark Pact, plus those sustained hits maybe plus Lasher Tendrils as well, you could do enough damage to potentially get a serious amount of wounds restored. Feels like this one might well be a bit lesser used though. I feel like that 5+ chance just means that it's not going to have that much effect for your command points. Finally, for 1 CP, we've got Demonic Possession, which I think is really interesting. This one, you get to choose a non-demon vehicle, and this gains the demon keyword, and then gets to keep it for the rest of the battle. You trigger it in your own command phase. On paper at least, this one does look really quite fun. Means that you could be using this on, say, a Chaos Land Raider, and then have +1 to wound las cannons for the rest of the game, which sounds very scary on paper. Perhaps the same for a Vindicator or maybe a Predator Destructor perhaps. One command point for +1 to wound for the rest of the game for the vehicle does seem just very good indeed to me. For one command point used early in the game, that seems very nice just to buff one unit in your firebase. The downside of the contract thing is only going to come up if you specifically roll a 6, and it could make the unit more relevant for other stratagems or one certain good enhancement that we'll get onto. I feel like this one will get used if you have certain units that you take along with a specific mind to use it on. Next up for one command point, we've got Unstoppable Rampage. This one almost feels a little bit Chaos Knight. A vehicle unit gets to use this, and it doesn't matter whether you're a demon vehicle or a regular vehicle. It just basically means that you can move through terrain features as if they weren't there, either in the movement phase or when charging. You don't get to ignore enemy miniatures for this one, so if your opponent's got a screening unit, that still might be a problem, but occasionally that could be a really big deal. Again, like a few of these, it seems like Mauler Fiends could be big winners, potentially starting very hidden on the wrong side of a terrain feature, then bursting out straight through it and into the enemy. It also seems like it could be a very nice one for Lords of Skulls as well. They've got really quite a big profile, which might mean they might struggle to clear terrain. And if you write up to the terrain piece that you want to move through beforehand, this could potentially allow them to get through gaps they couldn't otherwise clear at all. Next for 1 CP, there's Predatory Pursuit. This one's a sort of reactive move that vehicles can do when an enemy unit finishes a move in the movement phase that ends within 9 inches of them. Your vehicle gets to make a reactive movement of 6 inches directly towards that enemy unit, though given that it's specified as a normal move, you can't use this one to engage them in combat or anything like that. Overall, I'm a little bit suspect as to how good that's going to be. I guess maybe if it makes the difference of your model being on an objective or not on an objective, that could be handy. Maybe if it just gets you 6 inches towards the rest of the enemy foe, but given it's still the opponent's turn at this point, if they've got some serious things to deal damage to you, just stepping up into the middle of the board might mean you just take more damage or get easier charges against you. I feel like this one every so often would be one to look out for in case it could do something potentially useful, though I think oftentimes it won't. Finally, for 1 CP, there's Feeding Frenzy. This one happens when an enemy unit tries to fall back from a demon vehicle. Anything falling back from that vehicle now must take a Desperate Escape test or lose models, and then you go to a -1 to the test if the unit's also battle shocked. This one's nice enough and again seems to really favour melee type vehicles, things like Mauler Fiends, maybe slamming into one enemy unit and trying to tie up another one if possible. Probably going to be most impactful if you can ever trigger that on some elite infantry that really need to fall back, or just threatening it to your opponent might mean that they just choose to stay in combat anyway, when otherwise it might not have made much sense to them. Again, that one could be fun for a Lord of Skulls as well, potentially. Most things are going to want to fall back from that thing, and it does mean that you could potentially make a few incidental casualties happen if the unit is either big or important enough to risk making the foe roll that test. Overall, generally seems like some pretty helpful stratagems overall. The AP boost, I think, is a nice one that will be useful in shooting in the fight phase. The Demonic Possession one, just to make more and more of your vehicles +1 to wound with their shooting for the whole game, is really nice indeed. And the 3 that are on this page all seem handy enough for melee type vehicles. Mauler Fiends the most obvious, maybe Lord Discordant, Lord of Skulls, or perhaps even Defilers if they make sense to field. Finally, for the Soulforged Warpack, we come to Enhancements. First up, we've got the Invigorated Mecha Tendrils, +4 inches to movement for a Warpsmith. I guess that could be nice enough to allow him to try and keep pace with some aggressive moving vehicles. Its final cost would have to be kind of cheap though. Tempting addendum, very much has the name of Vashtor modifying the terms of the deal in somehow, and this one looks like it could be the seriously threatening enhancement. It's a small 3-inch aura for demon vehicle units, and if they're within that aura, then if they fail that contract Dark Pact, they take 1 additional mortal wound. So potentially if you get unlucky, that could be anywhere between 2 and 4 mortal wounds taken per failed Dark Pact, which will also be kind of likely to happen as well. But for the downside of that, you do get some serious damage boosts, as your unit gets to fully reroll all hits, potentially very very nice when you've got the +1 to wound on the go, and also say maybe sustained hits from the Dark Pact itself. It does mean that every so often you are going to do some at least fairly major damage to one of your vehicles, which definitely isn't nothing, but at the same time having vehicles that reroll all hit rerolls and also get +1 to wounds seems absolutely savage. Just feels like at that point you're probably going to be spitting out so much damage out of your Daemon Engines that a bit of chip damage on your own forces isn't the end of the world. Next up we've got Forge's Blessing. This one's a reactive defensive boost. In your command phase, select one vehicle unit within 12 inches to have a 6 plus feel no pain. I feel like this one's nice enough, really. Just means that the vehicle that's most likely to attract negative attention gets a little bit less easy to kill. A 6 plus feel no pain isn't really that much, equates to an overall 20% durability boost for the thing in question, but at least it feels like quite an easy to use one. Definitely doesn't seem worthless to have sat in the middle of your formation. Finally, we've got one called Soul Harvester. Destroy an enemy unit within 12 inches of the bearer's model for a 5 plus chance to spawn a command point for each enemy unit that's been slain. That one obviously caps to the normal 1 command point you can regenerate outside of your Battleforged one. I guess the character in question would have to be on the front line and surviving there for that to pay off in any way whatsoever. Again, if the final cost winds up being cheap enough, then I could see that being alright just as a kind of incidental one. You would need to have a character going forward to trigger it in the first place, though. It's neither strong nor reliable enough to just have this with the whole point of that character to be able to use this enhancement. Overall, I feel like the formation seems like really quite a cool one. I think perhaps the most interesting bit about it is just literally that detachment rule for the extra damage either in melee or at range. Plus, being able to possess your other vehicles seems pretty excellent and easy to do with any sort of firepower chaos tanks that are worth it. And I must admit, I do like that doubling down and taking even more damage for the Dark Pacts enhancement. If you had a little firebase with multiple of that on the go, getting to reroll all hits and then get +1 to wound on lots of scary firepower, say from multiple Forge Fiends for example, that just looks pretty lethal to me. Even if you're quite regularly going to be taking some fairly big damage on one or more of those vehicles. Overall seems kind of fun, definitely looks like it's in the place where if Daemon Engines get particularly efficient, after we know the final points costs for them, then this could certainly be a pretty reasonable way to play them. Finally, for the detachments, we've got the Pactbound Zealots. This is the new reincarnation of the Slaves to Darkness one from the Index, though it's now billed as more like the Word Bearers one. Maybe kind of appropriate for them, devoting different units to the Chaos deities themselves or pledging to Chaos Undivided. As before, all the units in your army need to choose one of 5 different marks: Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh, and Chaos Undivided, and then depending on which one you've gone for, you get a different buff on one specific Dark Pact. If you go for lethal hits in melee, then Khorne gets you them on a 5+, the same for Slaanesh with sustained hits, and then Tzeentch and Nurgle are range related. Tzeentch goes off on a 5+ at range with lethal hits, and Nurgle on a 5+ at range with sustained hits. Finally, Chaos Undivided allows you to get reroll hit rolls of 1, so it's a little bit less standout than any of the others on their individual best target, but does do a bit of range and a bit of melee, and it does have quite a good stratagem to back it up. These ones most Chaos players will be pretty well familiar with already. The ones that seem to get used the most are Nurgle for the sustained hits at range, which is really nice for Obliterators, or Chaos Predators and Vindicators, and it's just as much for the stratagem to stop them from being shot at long range. Slaanesh is used quite often on smaller fast moving units. Sustained hits in melee can be quite nice on say Warp Talons, or maybe Legionaries with some Chaos Lords for a good amount of fighting in close combat. And Chaos Undivided tends to get used quite a lot. That one may be more for the big reroll to wound stratagem, really nice on things like Forge Fiends just for pure damage, or things like Chaos Chosen or Terminators. Broadly speaking, it's going to work fairly similar, but again, like the main Dark Pacts rule, there has been a small nerf to this. They now only get this boosted version of the Dark Pacts if they don't fail the leadership test for the Dark Pact overall. Otherwise, you just get the core benefit that you went for in the first place, lethal or sustained hits of your choosing. Between that and taking the damage first rather than after you've attacked, that does mean that the core rules for this damage dealer one are going to be a bit worse overall. I still think it's pretty interesting and gives you some big damage buffs, particularly when you need it, and it's going to be better for units that get to reroll the Dark Pact. There's plenty that get icons like Chaos Possessed, Legionaries, and Bikers, so that means that you're very reliably going to be triggering this. Otherwise, the detachment keeps the same supporting rules. There's no Khorne Psychers allowed. Leaders must lead a squad of the same mark, though the only thing that doesn't seem to have made it into this from the January errata is there's nothing to say that a squad of the same mark has to ride in a transport of the same mark, so I guess unless they decide to re-errata that, you could put things like Nurgle Rhinos for that stratagem and transport units of Undivided, Chosen or Legionaries if you wanted to. Overall, I still think it's a very cool detachment rule, though it is a little bit worse than it was. For their stratagems, they only really had one major change and then a few tweaks. They lost access to Infernal Rites, which was the sort of 2 CP Armor of Contempt style one. That one's instead been replaced by this one called Eye of the Gods. You use it when a character keyword unit slays an enemy unit in the fight phase. And then for 1 command point, you can have the gods smile down on that character. You get +1 to your movement, toughness, wounds, attacks, +1 strength, and +1 damage to their melee weapons. You can't use this on things like epic heroes, demon keyword units, or damned units like the Dark Commune. But this does seem like a pretty powerful boost to say something like a standard Chaos Lord. In particular, the standout thing seems to be +1 attack and +1 damage on their melee weapons, means they're hitting with a spectacular amount of stuff with damage 3 after that, and the other stuff certainly doesn't hurt as well. Overall does seem quite fun and lore appropriate, and I feel like it will be usable enough if you don't think they're just going to be immediately wiped out in retaliation next turn. Otherwise, we've got 1 command point for Profane Zeal, the only battle tactic in the detachment now. This one's the undivided one that allows units to reroll wound rolls when either shooting or fighting. This one's a really good incentive to make the units undivided in the first place, and means that you could have, say, Forged Fiends with devastating wounds rerolling all wound rolls, which is very nice. Or things like Chaos Terminated or Chosen getting to reroll those wound rolls in combat, or Possessed doing so fishing for their turn of devastating wounds. It's really nice with Chaos Lords as well, who can use it basically for free. Again, I just rate this one as a really strong stratagem, definitely can spit out masses of damage. Next up, we've got Eternal Hate for 1 command point. This one's a 4+ chance to fight on death, or 3+ if you're Khorne. It's powerful enough if you've got a dangerous melee unit that's going to be wiped out by an enemy dangerous melee unit. It could be very nasty to get a bunch of damage on that enemy unit as your unit falls. Festering Miasma is the new name for the Nurgle stratagem. This one's reactive stealth against enemy shooting, handy enough to have in its own right against certain units, but it gets really good if you use it on a Nurgle Marks unit, as they can't be shot outside of 18 inches, really nasty for gunline units sat maybe a bit further away from the enemy, and combos quite nicely with the Nurgle boost giving you sustained hits. It means that you could have a unit take some damage and then you shield them from harm, knowing that the enemy needs to then go after something else, and they might not kill it and you might still have a full fire base to fire back with. Again, this one's still a very nice one. Next up for 1 CP we've got Skin Shift. This one heals a unit for 3 wounds, quite good for vehicles which could restore their degrading profile occasionally, or just generally good for anything that's really big and tough and hard to take the wounds off, maybe for a Demon Prince with the Intoxicating Elixir. If it's a Tzeentch unit as well and you'd had a model slain, then he gets to restore a slain model to the unit. That could be something quite big and scary like maybe a Havoc perhaps. So I feel like that rarely seems to come up so much, as I've not seen very many people running marks of Tzeentch on things. Lethal hits at range doesn't really seem to be quite as tempting as sustained hits for the most part, or the threat of that full reroll wound stratagem from Undivided. Finally, for the Slaanesh one, it's been renamed Torpifying Refrain. This one's been nerfed slightly for most units. If you're not Mark of Slaanesh, then you just get to fall back and charge, which is alright but not massive. Slaanesh units get far more options though. They get to advance and charge, advance and shoot, fall back and shoot, and fall back and charge. I'd say that the advance and charge bit of it is probably the single biggest thing out of all that. It means that you could have units just rocket across the board a really scary distance and still charge with the enemy. It's quite good for things like Warp Talons with that. The Slaanesh mark for those sustained hits is generally pretty handy in melee as well. Overall, broadly pretty similar stratagems. I think that Chaos Space Marines in general have pretty powerful stratagems before, and they've kept them here. They retain the same things that they had with the balanced nerfs in January, though I still think the stratagems are good. The Eye of the Gods one being traded out for Infernal Rites maybe feels like a bit of a side grade. The Infernal Rites I think was a bit too expensive for more general use, though could be handy with a Chaos Lord, but Eye of the Gods could definitely make that Chaos Lord massively scary in later turns. Finally, we've got the Pactbound Zealots enhancements. These ones are locked to specific god devotions. Unfortunately, they've lost the undivided option, the Liber Hereticus. Games Workshop seeming to want to keep detachments to 4 enhancements only. It does seem that for some reason they've chosen to slightly nerf each one of the enhancements, some of them a bit more meaningfully than others though. The Khorne one is the Talisman of Burning Blood. It gives you +1 attack and +1 strength, or plus D3 to both if you use a Dark Pact. This one's been nerfed in that you now need to pass the leadership test for that boosted version to take effect. Alright if you're going Khorne on your character I guess. For Tzeentch we've got the Eye of Tzeentch. This one gives you a farmed command point if you pass a Dark Pact and the leadership test is an 8 or more. Previously this was just if you pass the leadership test in the first place. It's down to a 42% chance if you even attempt a Dark Pact now, so even if you're managing to do one once per turn or game long, you're only averaging like 2 CP. Unless this one comes down in price quite significantly, it's probably not going to be worth it. The Slanesh one with the intoxicating elixir I think was one of the most interesting before, besides the Eye of Tzeentch. This one gives your own unit a personal 5+ feel no pain, that being the main bit, and then you also get to hand out a battle shock test each time it attacks if you make a dark pact and you didn't fail the leadership test. The 5+ feel no pain is just pretty great in itself though. It's good for a sturdy demon prince that is already fairly tough to take out in the first place, and this essentially just makes it 50% tougher. If they do shift the points significantly so Lord Discordants get good, it could be theoretically quite good for them as well as another big tanky generic character. Finally for Nurgle there's the Orbs of Unlife. This one triggers at the end of each fight phase as a small mortal wound bomb around the character. Any enemy units within 3 inches take D3 mortal wounds on the roll of a 4+, improving to a 3+ if you make a Dark Pact and pass the leadership test. It got nerfed versus the index version to only be 3-inch range, a good chance that you might only get to use this on one unit that you might still be in close combat with. I feel like it's just a bit unreliable and the damage isn't so great to be particularly interesting, but it's not nothing. In general, I feel like the enhancements aren't really the strong point of this detachment. The Slanesh one and maybe the Eye of Tzeentch are okay if the Eye of Tzeentch gets cheap, but I'd certainly rate the strongest bits of this detachment being the big damage that you can get from the core rule, and lots of useful stratagems with things like rerolling wound rolls, shielding you from enemy view, and potentially advance and charge with Slanesh. Still feels like, with initial impressions, this one could be pretty interesting, though I do think it's going to have far more competition with things like the Renegades and Corsairs out and about, and other scary options like the Black Legion one or the Soulforged hunting pack. Overall, I feel like Codex Chaos Space Marines hasn't done too badly, a fairly fun set of detachments there, most of them with at least some pretty creative and fun rules, even if I feel like some of them are going to be significantly stronger than others. Maybe just from initial takes, the Renegade Raiders one with the Red Corsairs, the scary Daemon Engines of the Soulforged Warpack, they seem like some of the more intimidating ones. The Veterans one and the Pactbound Zealots both also seem really nice and general purpose. I feel like the Deceptors and the Fellhammer ones don't really have the greatest support options, but they do have some really good core rules. Putting loads of things in Infiltrate is very nice, and just having a spectacularly tanky detachment with -1 to wound and pop-up 5+ feel no pains are both good. I feel like probably the most fun and fluff type ones are going to be the Chaos Cult and the Dread Talons. The Chaos Cult just doesn't really have the units to make it work properly, and I feel like a few of the ones like the Traitor Guardsmen and the Felgors will need to go down quite a lot before you'd really think about taking them too much. And the Dread Talons is a bit over-invested in Battle Shock. It definitely has some fun tricks, but it's always going to be really quite unreliable, and a few of the stratagems just seem super niche. I felt like there needed to be really quite strong ones, like the big shooting buff one, if they're going to be so heavily dependent on Battle Shock. It's going to be really interesting to see what Chaos players make of these though. There's definitely some fun stuff here. Let's get on to datasheets next though, and compare with the index, there were 49 datasheets in the index and 48 datasheets in the Codex. Codex Chaos Space Marines maybe not expecting to be having too many added or taken away, given that they had a bit of a cull in 9th edition with several things getting rotated out. The ones that have left the Codex are Lucius Eternal and the Noise Marines. As mentioned, they're going to go to the digital download for the Emperor's Children that should be out in the not too distant future. A soft hint that we'll probably be getting a codex for them later in 10th edition, though Games Workshop haven't officially come out and said so much just yet. The other casualty that's fallen by the wayside is the Exalted Champion. He's had no current model on sale for a while. Previously he was sort of like the Lieutenant equivalent that you could run it in the same unit as a Chaos Lord, though I didn't really see people using them too much in game. I guess if you got the model you could either run him as a Chaos Lord or a Master of Executions and still put him down on the table. Otherwise, the third sort of stealth casualty is the cultist mob. They still remain in the codex, but they lost their auto gun and special weapon loadout. You have to take just the melee weapons now, which I think was the weaker of the two. I think that's due to the older kit with the auto guns and the special weapons no longer being on sale. Again, it's a case of no model, no rules, and not much fun. Otherwise, to balance out those losses, the Chaos Lord with the jump pack got added back in. He was taken away in 9th edition, but is now back with a shiny new model. Oh, we've also got an individual datasheet for the minor support character in this Cultist Firebrand here, a leader with a great big flamer, and we'll get onto their datasheet shortly. The other question mark for units that people were worried might go away was Huron Blackheart. He had a miniature that went out of production, but it seems that his datasheet has stayed around. I guess for the resin datasheets, all the things that are out of production that remain in the Codex are ones that Games Workshop eventually intends to release a character model for. I could really easily see a new one for Huron Blackheart coming along as some sort of narrative campaign, maybe towards the end of 10th, or I guess could do for maybe a more minor character release at some stage. Fingers crossed he'll get a nice plastic resculpt at some point though. While we're on the subject of datasheets, I'll just take another slide here just to underline that the printed points in the Codex are broadly not relevant. In general, each time I do a Codex review, there tends to be a lot of people commenting that the points are higher than they'd expect, or have weirdly become very different for certain units compared with what they were before. In general, it seems that Games Workshop have just stuck with the Codex printed points to be the ones they roughly set at the start of 10th edition, and really haven't changed them too much since then. And basically for points cost, you should be comparing them to the digital index points that came before the Codex. They're the ones that have had a few balance passes and are more likely to be closer to the actual value that comes out when they update the digital points for the Codex. In general, from the pre to the post Codex, most units seem to stay at least fairly similar to their previous digital points, maybe nosing a little bit up or down depending on datasheet or detachment type buffs. They were only going to know the final values when they released them sometime in the week of the 18th to the 25th of May. It's often on the Wednesday or Thursday. I'll absolutely be covering those on the channel in a future video to talk about the whole rules update, but until then please don't get too stressed about the points in the Codex. Besides them maybe being a few useful hints for things like enhancements or new units, they're broadly not going to be right. With all that said though, let's talk about datasheets proper. There's a fair few themes in the datasheets in Codex Chaos Space Marines. In the Codex, the battle line units are legionaries and cultists as they were before. There's no locking of cultists to only being battle line in the Chaos Cult or anything like that, so you can still take loads if you'd like to. Traitor Guardsmen also gain battle line as well if they're in the Chaos Cult detachment. Otherwise, themes of the Codex are that mortal followers have now gained a new keyword called Damned. That applies to things like the Chaos Cultists, Felgor Ravagers, and Dark Commune and friends. We've already talked about that a fair bit, as it locks them out of certain options in some detachments, and you need it for most of the things in Chaos Cult. Otherwise, Chaos comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes. There's a fair bit of variation between different datasheets. The majority of the actual Heretic Astartes and Armor sort of units are Leadership 6+, most of the damned units are Leadership 7. That can definitely have a bearing on how many mortal wounds they're likely to take with Dark Pacts. A few units get Chaos Icons. They've had different rules over the years, but these days they allow rerolls to the leadership tests for Dark Pacts, meaning that you're more likely to avoid that mortal wound damage, and it's also doubly relevant for the Pactbound Zealots detachment, as you only get the additional benefit if you pass that leadership test, so having a reroll on it is pretty important. Finally, there's a fair few demonic units out there. The general theme for them is that they get a 5+ invulnerable save to represent their unnatural resilience. Let's start with the datasheets proper though, and we'll start out with the new datasheets and then move through the others, talking about any changes they've had since the index and perhaps their overall place in the army before now and now. First up, I thought we'd start with a truly new unit in the Cultist Firebrand. He's a fairly cool Blackstone Fortress model that's going to be available direct from Games Workshop. Quite a cool little miniature, though maybe a bit weird as he came as part of a Cultist box set before, but now they're selling him as basically the same sort of price as that whole box set, but just as a single character miniature. He moves 6 inches, has toughness 4 and a 4+ save, 4 wounds, a leadership 6 and OC 1, and he can join a cultist mob or accursed cultists. He gets the damned keyword and gets the grenade keyword as well. And of course the most exciting thing that he has is that big balefire pike. D6 plus 3 shots at strength 5, AP 1 and damage 1. So he's basically got a heavy flamer on steroids, or with torrent and ignores cover of course, as melee gets a bunch of hits at strength 4, AP 0, but not really any good there. His special rule allows you to reroll leadership tests for cultists, so I guess could be nice for helping avoid some mortal wounds on Dark Pacts, or making them go off a bit more reliably in Pactbound Zealots. And he also hands out Battle Shock with that Balefire Pike as well. An infantry unit hit by that has to take a Battle Shock test. Overall, unless he winds up being super cheap after the digital points update, I'm not sure it's going to be that worth it. His damage output isn't awful in terms of range for a character, though it's still not standout either. And both of his special rules I'd rate as merely okay if you're largely going to be buffing chaff. I just can't really see things like Accursed Cultist wanting to take him versus the Dark Commune in particular, maybe the Dark Apostle if you're playing it in the Pactbound Zealots. And for the most part, more standard cultists tend to be far more worth it in just super low investment units without support. You wouldn't really want to be adding a character to that for the most part. I'm not very optimistic that he'll be strong in any way, though I do think he's a fun little model. Otherwise, for the new units, we've got the return of the Chaos Lord with Jump Pack. He's got the stat line that you'd expect of a normal Chaos Lord. Toughness 4 with 5 wounds and a 4+ invulnerable save. He moves 12 inches with fly and can deep strike. And it looks like he's going to be a leader for Raptors alone. Unfortunately, he cannot lead Warp Talons. And to be honest, I was kind of expecting as much. They've usually been treated differently in the past as they're sort of demonic monstrosities as opposed to more normal Chaos Space Marines. For war gear, he gets the bolt pistol or the directly superior plasma pistol, so probably go for that. And then for the melee weapons, you get the choice of a cursed weapon, pair of accursed weapons, or lightning claws. Or in reality, the best choice by far is the power fist here. 5 attacks at strength 8, AP 2, and damage 2. I think in general that's going to be more worth it than just more attacks and twin links to shred some hordes a little bit better. You're best off having something that can tangle against some medium toughness, heavy infantry sort of targets, as opposed to being better against the light stuff. Otherwise, for his special rules, he gets Lord of Chaos for those 3 battle tactics stratagems, and then his bonus rule is one called Cruel Hunter. This one allows his raptors to pile in and consolidate 6 inches while he's leading a unit. So I guess could be quite a nice one if you could charge in with him, wipe out an enemy unit, then consolidate and tie up the next thing. Plus it should be quite good for making sure his entire squad can get into combat to fight. I say it's an alright special rule though, maybe not quite as exciting as the strength buff that the Loyalist Jump Pack captain gets, and I feel like his datasheet doesn't really have any surprises for the positive really. I still think it's nice enough though, we'll add a bit of fight to a raptor unit and give them free stratagems if that makes sense. It is just going to be dependent on whether or not you want to use a big scary squad of raptors and whether you're playing in a detachment where it makes sense to be able to offer them free battle tactic stratagems depending on what's on offer. Let's get into the units though, and we'll start out with the Chaos Space Marine infantry and squads, then talk about all of the damned units, then go on to the Chaos vehicles and finish up with the characters. Starting out, we've got your basic legionaries, unchanged in the Codex for the most part. Standard issue Chaos Space Marines with 2 wounds, and they can take a fair amount of pretty scary weapons here. 2 heavy melee weapons per squad of 5, 1 heavy or special weapon per squad of 5, plus chainswords versus bolters, and one of them taking a balefire tome. They can still take the full complement of Havoc style heavy weapons as well, despite them not actually coming in the box set. Their special rule is re-rolling wound rolls of 1 or re-rolling all wound rolls against enemies on objectives, and they can get a chaos icon as well. Between the lot of that, they're a pretty efficient little unit at the previous 80-point cost that they had pre-Codex, really quite nice, and were a central unit for the army. If they remain at that sort of cost, they're going to be really quite usable, and certainly seem pretty central for certain detachments like the Alpha Legion one where you can infiltrate them, and they can have some pretty scary damage output in Veterans or the Pactbound one. Overall looks pretty good. If they remain 80 points, I still think they're going to be standouts. Next up for the Armoured Elite, pre-Codex the Chaos Terminators were 185 points per 5. They get you the chunky Terminator stat line at T5, a 4+ invulnerable save and 3 wounds. They move quite slowly but they can deep strike to get them there, and then hit the enemy with a whole variety of weapons. Combi bolters versus combi weapons, a Reaper autocannon, and then a mix of power fists in close combat, though they still have the slightly awkward war gear options for the squad, meaning that you can't arm them all with any one thing annoyingly. They still have their Despoiler special rule, making a Dark Pact allowing them to re-roll the hit roll, so they do punch pretty hard compared with some other Terminators out there. That rule does maybe have a bit of unfortunate overlap with other buffing rules though. It means that things like Abaddon's aura of re-rolling hit rolls or the Veterans one just doesn't really stack with them, which maybe feels like a bit of an oversight, as you'd sort of imagine them to be quite good things with Terminators for both of them. It's still going to be an interesting focal unit though, definitely fun with certain characters and enhancements and stratagems all layered on. You could make them very tanky in the Iron Warriors detachment with that Bastion plate, and you could be spitting out perhaps a surprising amount of mortal wounds while advancing in the Veterans one. Next up, we've got the Chaos Chosen, which were up to 130 points for 5, and were one of the scary units from prior to previous balance updates. They can be quite nasty jumping out of rhinos, and they were quite liked with the Mark of Chaos Undivided in the old Slaves to Darkness detachment, hitting with a whole bunch of accursed weapons, plus 1 power fist per 5 of them, plus a few interesting combi weapon and plasma pistol shots. They can still advance and charge as well, so get a better threat range than most, and have a big 3 wounds, so they're fairly tanky for more standard Chaos Space Marine equivalents. Again, they didn't really get any changes in the Codex. They can be joined by Abaddon the Despoiler now though. He was side graded, so he'd be leading these guys as opposed to the rank and file legionaries. I think they still seem interesting, though I'd hope they might come down in cost a little bit, seeing as they had their Dark Pacts nerfed in a couple of different ways since the Index, though I guess we'll see. Next up, we've got Possessed, 130 points per 5 of them, fast moving, big melee horrors with toughness 6, 3 wounds, and a 5+ invulnerable save. They strike in melee with 4 attacks each, at strength 5, AP 1, and damage 2, and do get a Chaos icon for rerolling those Dark Pacts when they need to. Unfortunately, Possessed have taken a quite big nerf here. The Dark Pact that allows them to get devastating wounds can only be used once per game now. Previously, they could basically just have permanent devastating wounds on the go with those melee weapons, and it made them really quite general purpose combatants. Unfortunately, that's going to be far less the case now. They're just not going to be able to handle tough stuff very easily. Again, I'd hope that might come alongside a further points decrease for them. They also took a nerf to the Master of Possession as well, who lost his 6+ Feel No Pain buff. Next up, we've got the Hell Riders of the Chaos Bikers. They were really quite cheap pre-Codex at 75 points per 3. For that cost, I thought they were very good value indeed. 3 wounds at toughness 5 is tanky enough for that. They move very fast at 12 inches, have okay objective control per point, and actually hit with a serious amount of damage with 2 special weapons like Meltagons, a Power Fist, and some chainswords on the regular guys. They've had a bit of a side grade in the Codex. They lost their rule, which meant they could return to Strategic Reserve at the sides of the board, but instead get +1 strength on the charge. So I guess it means that those chainsword guys will be hitting extra hard. 4 attacks each at strength 5 AP 1, which isn't too bad. Might be a slight nerf for them, but I feel like multiple out of their detachments do seem really quite nice. They seem fun with the Red Corsair style one in particular. You could have these guys travelling a very long distance and still being able to advance, shoot and charge. If they remain close to their 75 points that they were before, they'll be quite a good unit I think. Next up, we've got the Raptors, 85 points per 5 previously. These are a fairly standard Chaos Space Marine with a jump pack profile, a 12-inch movement, fly, and deep strike. They're a bit shootier than some factions' jump troops. They can have 2 special weapons per 5 models, maybe a Melter and Plasma being the most tempting, a Power Fist on the Sergeant, and then beyond that they do Battle Shock things, a 6-inch aura of -1 leadership, and they can hand out a Battle Shock test at the start of the fight phase. Battle Shock is maybe a bit peripheral in the game currently, though as you'd expect they're going to be a pretty central unit in Dread Talons, a good mix of melee things and a few things that specifically help out jump units. At 85 points as they were before though, they're definitely not awful just for cheap fast skirmishers, though I think some people might prefer bikes. Their equivalent Warp Talons were 110 points before, a similar sort of profile but with a 5+ invulnerable save tacked on. They also get the Demon keyword as they're rather possessed. In combat they strike with the equivalent of Lightning Claws, 4 attacks at strength 5, AP 2, damage 1 and twin linked, so they do tend to stack a whole load of AP 2 damage 1 wounds on most anything, and are quite nice with sustained hits, potentially being very blendy against enemy units. In the Pactbound detachment they're very nice with Marks of Slanesh. Warp Talons are perhaps one of the most scary and changed units in the Codex though, perhaps to the point where I wouldn't be too surprised if Games Workshop errata this away. But basically previously they used to have a fall back and take desperate escape test type rule, but now they've swapped it for this rule called a Warp Strike, which on the face of it seems potentially a little bit broken. The way that this works is that if they were in combat, and by the end of the fight phase they're no longer in engagement range with anything, they can then choose to opt to return to strategic reserves, being able to deep strike again later in the game. I guess the idea is that they charge something, kill it, and as a reward from the Chaos Gods, they walk back out of existence to redeploy somewhere later. The disturbing thing about this one though is that you would be able to use rapid ingress to bring them back in the opponent's next turn, so you could have a cycle repeating where they basically charge something and just delete it with 10 of them with a million warp claw attacks. Then they use their ability to warp off the board, and then after the opponent's movement phase you bring them back in for 1 command point with rapid ingress, drop them somewhere they can't be shot, but I'm sure they'll be able to catch things with their very long move distance and charge threat range. Make sure they can catch something that they'll be able to kill between 10 Warp Talons again, which is quite a lot, and then once more warp them off the board. Just seems like a massive scary problem unit that the opponent just basically can't interact with whatsoever, provided you bring them in the right places and they pick on things they will kill. The only way that they could do damage to them would be things like indirect fire, overwatch, or just having something that's so tanky the Warp Talons can't kill it, but all kind of peripheral stuff compared with what the intent of this rule probably was. Between that, I really wouldn't be too surprised if Games Workshop changed this in some way, so pinging them on and off the board every turn with rapid ingress isn't a possibility. Until if and when they do choose to do that though, Warp Talons look very very scary. Wouldn't be too surprised to see a unit appearing in a lot of Chaos lists, as that kind of sort of zero interactivity, deleting enemy units is just something that will be massively feared. Next up, we've got the heavy weapon specialists in the Havocs, 120 points per 5 pre-Codex, and these guys are pretty well unchanged. They still get their full flexible choice of whatever heavy weapons you'd like. I'd probably be most tempted by the las cannons out of the choices, just as some dedicated scary anti-tank, but plenty of other firepower flavours on offer if you want. Just in general, they're pretty nice heavy weapon troopers to fight at long range. They can move and shoot without penalty and don't have the heavy sort of keyword that lots of other equivalents like Devastators have. Their toughness 5, so a tiny bit sturdier against enemy ranged attacks, and they get to ignore modifiers to the hit roll or ballistic skill. At 120 points, they're fairly cheap. You could have a pretty scary firebase without all that much investment, though they're more fragile than many of the tanks and Daemon Engines to return fire. Next up, we've got the Obliterators that previously were available in 2s or 4s for 180 points or 360 for 4. Unfortunately, though, they took a couple of nerfs in the Codex, the biggest one being that you can only take 2 models per unit now, and that means that any stratagems or things that you put on the unit won't be quite as effective, which is quite a big deal given that there's some fairly nasty shooting ones on offer between these detachments. The other nerf that they got was that their melter profile is now only 18-inch range. Previously it was 24, like the other flesh metal guns that they can fire. It is still really quite intimidating. D3 shots at strength 12, AB3 and damage 4 is certainly going to leave a mark. But previously when it was 24-inch range, you could drop into melter range with that, and each failed save could be a huge damage 6. Overall, not quite so good there. Could still be kind of nice with certain detachments and big hits and reroll stratagems that they can access, plus things like Mark of Nurgle in Pactbound. Otherwise, they're fairly tanky individually. 5 wounds at toughness 7 with a 2+ save, 3 different firing modes, so they're fairly just general purpose and kind of jack of all trades, master of none, and they can still hit fairly hard in close combat if the enemy does decide to tie them up and take a lot of power fist attacks. Once per game, they get the ability to indirect fire when they make a Dark Pact as well, and that can be a big deal when you're hitting with big strength 12 and damage 4 attacks. Could be a bit of a power play just to utterly ruin something that the enemy should have by all rights kept safe. Still seem that they could be interesting enough for a big deep strike threat, and even 2 of them could still be worth using stratagems on. 180 points worth of models is still a fairly threatening unit. Let's get on to the damned units next, and first up we have the cultist mob. As mentioned earlier, these guys lost basically one of their 2 different loadouts. You could either equip them for melee or for range. Now the ranged one has gone away. They used to be as pictured as you can see here on the datasheet, but unfortunately you can't take these guns anymore. The regular guys lost their autogun option, and they also lost their free special weapons. You could get things like heavy stobbers and grenade launchers and more exciting guns on the sergeant, and in compensation for that they just gained the damned keyword. Despite this, they're still going to be a good unit. The role never really was to deal damage in meaningful ways anyway, that was just kind of a nice extra. Their main thing is they're just cheap units that get some objective control where it needs to be, and have that nice sticky objectives rule for the Dark Gods. Really nice to be able to put that on a home field objective at the start of the game, and then move up towards the midfield. They're just helpful for chaff trading and screening units. I think that there will still be plenty of competitive lists running some for the sticky objectives and the other stuff that they can do for cheap. I guess if you want to get use out of the miniatures with the special weapons, it's probably best to use them as traitor guardsman proxies. I feel like the gear's close enough that that will be fine. For the more sinister and twisted cultists, we've got the Accursed Cultists. These copped some big nerfs in the January balance data slate, and it seems that the datasheet changes they got are kind of similar. They still remain only objective control 1 rather than 2 as they were at the start of 10th, and they've still got that set up where they get 5 of the smaller mutants with the toughness 4, 1 wound, and the 6+ feel no pain, and then 3 of the bigger torments with the 3 wounds. The mutants do a few anti-infantry type attacks, but the torments really do the main damage, hitting out with a bunch of strength 5, AP 1 and damage 2. I think people might be a bit disappointed to see their regeneration rule go away. Their previous one was that in the command phase you could regenerate 3 of the mutants or 1 of the torments, but that's now been instead replaced by another interesting rule, to be fair, called Howling Horde, which is an interesting pressure one for scrapping over objectives. This one means that now they get a sort of surge move when they get shot and take casualties, where they get to move d6 inches towards the closest enemy unit, potentially finishing in melee if they get far enough. That's very disruptive to enemy gun lines, means that you could have a whole load just lining up to take shots against the cultists, and then all of a sudden you can't shoot them anymore because they're in combat. Definitely a helpful one just to annoy the enemy. As well as that, they also gain Scout 6 inches, so you could have units of them moving towards the midfield a lot quicker. Outside of Chaos Cult, though, you wouldn't be able to attach a character to them and do that, given that their character leader options don't have the Scout keyword, like the Cultist Firebrand or the Dark Commune. Again, for these guys, I'd perhaps hope for a points decrease. 105 points per 8 of them maybe seems a bit excessive now they've lost the regeneration and the high objective control that they had before. They were cheaper than that originally. I feel like they could go down given the datasheet changes and the way that Chaos have moved on since that entire thing. Hopefully they are strong enough, as I feel like they're pretty pivotal to the Chaos Cult. If they're not strong, then that detachment's not going to be. Next up, we've got the mutated Felgor Beastmen. They were 95 points pre-codex and very overcosted. A bunch of essentially toughness 4 guardsmen with auto pistols and close combat weapons, and a few interesting things mixed in with the units like a corrupted stave, a small psyche attack, and one big strength 8 damage 2 swing that hits very inaccurately. The changes they got were to their special rules. They lost their scout move, and they swapped their bonus charges out. Instead, they get a rule called Bestial Raiders. It means that they can turn up from a strategic reserve round 1, counting as the next battle round for that purposes. So you could have units wander onto the board straight away, though you wouldn't be able to rapid ingress them as it specifies your movement phase. It is quite a fun rule, but they're let down by the fact that they just don't really do much when they get there. They'd have to be massively significantly cheaper than they are currently to be thought about in competitive lists. Finally, for our flavours of cultist chaff, we've got the Traitor Guardsman squad. Pre-codex these were 70 points, and are basically guardsman equivalents with objective control 2, so a bit sturdier on objectives versus cultists. Their fairly fun kill team set comes with a big variety of gear, and it means that they can take a trio of different special weapons within the unit, so it can put out a bit better firepower versus the cultist rank and file, particularly a lot more so since the regular cultists lost access to their special weapons. They did get a nerf in that you can't take 3 of the same special weapon before. It could be sort of at least fairly punchy to have 3 plasma guns or 3 melter guns on the go. I feel like they're still at least fairly good general purpose threat with a plasma, melter and grenade. They're all things that punch at least fairly hard. Otherwise they still have their special rule where they get the benefit of cover when they're on objectives. At 70 points I think they are overcosted a bit, and I don't think people would take them much on the upgrade versus cultists. If there are a lot more similar costs, people might think about it. The sticky objectives rule is quite good, but these guys do have some significant datasheet advantages, actually being able to kill things, objective control 2, and a 5+ save with automatic cover are all good things. I think it might have been nice to give you the option to maybe take big 20-man units of these in Chaos Cult. Could have certainly made that detachment a bit more interesting with any shooting options that it gave you. I thought we'd also talk about the remaining damned leaders here. We talked about the Cultist Firebrand earlier, so that leaves us with the Dark Commune and the Traitor Enforcer. The Dark Commune is the Cultist Command Squad that was previously 65 points, and it's basically unchanged as it was from the index. You get a Cult Demagogue that gets you a 5+ invulnerable save, which is very nice for the Accursed Cultist, makes them a bit harder to kill. And then once per game, that Demagogue can also give you a really quite big surge into melee. You get to advance and charge for the unit, and you get +1 to hit and wound when you get there. That is the difference between Accursed Cultists being kind of tame to being genuinely scary for a turn. 6 Torments with those boosts will usually leave a mark in whatever they hit, particularly with Dark Pacts on the go. Otherwise they have a little bit of damage and defense of themselves. They can tank a few bullets with their Blessed Blades, and the Mind Witch gets a fun Warp Curse for some Strength 5 damage too. They also give the unit Leadership 6+, and a Chaos Icon to reroll Dark Pacts, both of which are quite nice for preventing self-mortal wounds. I feel like if Accursed Cultists do get good, these guys will still be probably the go-to choice to lead them. Shame they didn't get Scouts though, as it means that if they join Accursed Cultists they can't use that. Finally, for the list of damned units, we've got the Traitor Enforcer. He's the Commissar and Ogrim Bodyguard that you can attach to a Traitor Guardsman squad. Pre-Codex he was 65 points, and they do actually have some okay melee threat between the two of them. 8 attacks total with mid strength, mid AP and damage 2, potentially able to punch a few Space Marines to death, though they are kind of at odds with what their unit wants to do, which is a bit more ranged focus. Previously they had a cancel battle shock special rule, but now their brutal example rule I think is a bit better. It now allows you to fire Overwatch for free with the Traitor Guardsman squad, which seems a lot more useful for getting their special weapons have a little bit more value out of them, even if it still doesn't seem like the biggest buff in the world. Interestingly enough, you still have to execute a model to set that brutal example. I guess commissars still like doing that, even if they're on the chaos side of things. Overall, again, they just feel like a bit of an awkward character. Usually for cheaper chaff units like that, you don't want to overinvest in them, and at least previously these guys cost about the same amount as an entire guardsman squad in the first place. I think they would need to be super cheap to really justify the entire unit overall, between the slightly eclectic mix of weakish range and sort of middling melee. That's it for the damned units, but I thought we'd mention Chaos Spawn here as well, seeing as I feel like they fit here better than most. Pre-Codex they were 70 points per 2, and they took a couple of changes in the book. Unfortunately these mindless things are objective control 0 now, so are going to be more sort of chaff secondary objectives rather than things that can contest primaries. They didn't gain the damned keyword, and they lost their regen D3 wounds ability. Instead they swapped that out for something called mind-breaking mutations. Non-vehicle enemy units within 3 inches subtract 1 from their objective control. I guess that means they could disrupt enemies trying to take objectives if they can't quite kill all of them. Otherwise just remain sort of medium tough little beasts with toughness 5, 4 wounds and a 4+ save, a 5+ feel no pain, and a bunch of hideous mutation attacks in melee. I feel like that objective control 0 thing is a little bit painful, as is losing the heal D3 wounds type of thing. I wasn't really the biggest fan of them before, when you could be getting things like cheap cultists. I feel like if anything they're probably worse than before, so hopefully they come down in points a bit. Next up, let's get into the Chaos Armory with their vehicle keyword units. First up, we've got the trusty Hellbrute, essentially the Chaos Dreadnought pretty much, and this one has its special rule for Dark Ascension, a 6-inch aura of getting Dark Pacts to have both effects with both sustained and lethal hits. So really quite dangerous when you roll those 6s, and extra nasty and Pactbound, as that'd both go off on 5s for most things. I feel like they're quite interesting for that buffing roll at 130 points. The points decrease help them there a bit. I guess you do get the Pactbound things a little bit less reliably than before though. Otherwise though, its damage and defense I'd say aren't particularly exciting for the cost. It is paying for that big buffing special rule. There's lots of choice of heavy weapons, though all of them may be a bit mid. I would probably take at least one melee weapon as they're far more threatening. Even if it was just as a countercharge threat, I feel like you get much more value out of them. And otherwise, the only datasheet change that it got was its tweak to its melee damage rules. If you equip it with 2 close combat weapons now, then both of those combat weapons gain +2 attacks, versus 2 fists gaining twin linked as it was before. That seems quite nice, and on paper something like a 7 attack Hellbrute hammer vehicle seems very scary, though I think I'd still probably go 1 heavy weapon and 1 melee weapon so it can fight in both phases. Maybe could be alright paired with Abaddon, getting lots of hit rerolls on a scary firebase and then doubling up on the good stuff with the Dark Pacts. Otherwise we've got the Chaos Predators. They remain as they were, toughness 10 tanks with 11 wounds and some big guns and sponsons. The Annihilator gets the twin las cannon turret with the rerolls of damage of 1 against monsters and vehicles, usually paired with las cannon sponsons of the same. It's alright if you want some dedicated anti-tank. In general, out of the two, I've seen far more people playing with the Predator Destructor though. It does just seem like the better overall damage bet. The thing that most people tend to do is perhaps the slightly less obvious one, but just embrace the more efficient guns regardless of the special rule of the tank. The autocannon on the turret is pretty nice for 6 shots at strength 9, AP 1 and damage 3, maybe AP 2 against infantry targets, and then pair that with some nice efficient tank busting las cannons on the sponsons, and it can be quite nice with Mark of Nurgle in Pactbound. No doubt plenty of other things will have interest now. Otherwise, pre-Codex, perhaps one of the flavour of the month units was the Chaos Vindicator, 175 points pre-Codex, and a big fairly chunky tank with toughness 11, 11 wounds and a 2+ save from that siege shield. When you're able to get that cover, that's very nice indeed. The Demolisher Cannon is short ranged, but you get D6 plus 3 shots at strength 14, AP 3 and damage D6 with blast is going to leave a mark in most anything. And if the enemy does try and tag it in close combat, it can still fire to exactly the same effect, provided it doesn't fall back. Again, this one's a very scary one with Mark of Nurgle in Pactbound for those sustained hits on 5s and 6s, just a general purpose gun turret that's going to be big and threatening against anything. Feels like it could be an interesting one to use possession on in the Soulforged pack, or just getting some big rerolls in the Veterans Detachment seems very nice just for straight up deleting one scary enemy threat. If they remain 175 points, I have a feeling they'll still be popular. The Chaos Land Raider does what it does in other detachments, 240 points, and unchanged in the Codex, a big toughness 12, 16 wound tank with a 2+ save, packing some big las cannons and some anti-infantry type guns, and then you can deliver enemy units to combat with the assault ramp, move the vehicle, disembark the things and they can still charge. Could be one way to get a big investment melee unit into combat, maybe some maxed out Chosen or a Terminator squad. Previously I'd say it'd be generally usable, but maybe not as standout as some. Lots of Chaos players quite like to use Rhinos to get their Legionaries and Chosen into melee, and Terminators, if you wanted to use them, can potentially deep strike or rapid ingress. It feels like it could come into its own in some detachments though. You could do possession on this in Soulforged again, and it could be quite nice in the Red Corsairs style detachment with the Raiders and Reavers. Getting access to nice cheap Armour of Contempt at 1 CP will be good news for it, plus that's got quite a nice option for charging out of transports. Next up we've got the Daemon Engines, and we're starting with the Defiler. 190 points pre-Codex, these things were kind of rarely run. Generally just seem as a bit underwhelming for the mix of weapon profiles it has. Its toughness 10, 14 wounds with its demon save, gets a mix of things including a battle cannon equivalent and a bunch of backup guns in shooting, and then some genuinely serious melee with 5 attacks at strength 16 and damage d6+1 in the fight phase. It still retains that scuttling walker sort of special rule, and now it also gets an extra one called Demon Forge, a 0 CP use of counter-offensive, so that's the interrupt style stratagem, could be disruptive in the enemy fight phase, though I guess if they know you've got that for free, they'll probably just fight against whatever they charged into it first, and you still might not have any good effect for it. It's definitely a nice little improvement though, and I feel like it's quite nice given the scuttling walker thing only really helped keep it functional with its big profile. I feel like it's still going to be super niche anywhere but the Soulforged pack. Getting a +1 to wound on all its guns out of that though does seem pretty great to me, plus going up to 7 attacks with its big claws in melee seems like that's going to be well worth it. Feel like they could be actually genuinely good there. The Venom Crawler pre-Codex was 110 points. This one's a cheaper Demon Engine with 9 wounds at T9 and moves quite fast at 12 inches. This one spits out a whole bunch of spammed sort of anti-space marine or anti-infantry type shots. The Excruciator Cannon's getting a total of 12 shots at strength 6, AP1 and damage 2, and then hitting with another 6 attacks at the same profile in melee. It did take a small nerf in the Codex, in that its Soul Eater rule for increasing the attack stats of its guns only triggers if you kill something in melee, not if you shoot something to death with the Excruciator cannons halfway across the battlefield. I feel like that maybe makes a bit more sense. If it's trying to eat their souls, it might be a bit far away from doing that otherwise. And to be honest, while the rule was kind of fun, I didn't think it was the most impactful thing ever. Could be fun if they situationally just charged up and were extra dangerous by the end of the game, though I still think they're fine without it. Overall, I still think they're usable enough just in general, and again, as with every Demon Engine, it's going to be great in Soulforge. +1 to wound with all those shots at range is very general purpose, should certainly flatten a bunch of enemy infantry and be reliably tripping away at other things. The Forge Fiend pre-Codex was 200 points, paying for its sins a little bit in the Pactbound style detachment. Most people running 3 copies of the Ectoplasma Cannon. 3d3 shots with Blast meant that you could be racking up a lot of extra attacks against anything that's a fairly big unit with a lot of numbers, and then combine that maybe with Mark of Nurgle and sustained hits, or the Undivided one, and have the chance to do 4 rerolls to wound for 1 CP, and that could combine with devastating wounds from its Demonic Ordnance special rule. Still looks like it's going to be a fun and dangerous gun turret, either there or elsewhere. Could be getting some 4 rerolls to hit with the Veterans formation, being able to advance and shoot with the Renegades, and as ever, +1 to wound with Soulforged Warpack again is going to be very, very nice. The Mauler Fiend is the melee version, getting the same chassis, another 12 wound Demon Engine with toughness 10 and a 10-inch move. This one hits nicely in melee with a bunch of strength 14 attacks. It could be backed up by some anti-infantry things with lasher tendrils, or take a few melter guns for some attacks on the way in. The Mauler Fiend did unfortunately get a nerf here. It doesn't get 2 B-roll advanced rolls and charge rolls anymore, and now its Siege Crawler special rule is kind of niche. You simply get to ignore any modifiers to its move, advance, and charge rolls, so that's something that doesn't really come up all that often in Warhammer 40k, and lots of the times that it does, it can't even apply to vehicles. Kind of a shame that out of the two parts of that special rule, they took away the more useful bit. Again, like the rest of the Daemon Engines, going to be great in the Soulforged pack. 8 attacks with those fists will be nice, plus there's some good stratagems for helping deliver it into melee as well. Being able to warp through walls when you need to could be very handy for this guy. The Helldrake, unless it gets some serious help in the points cost department, is going to be remaining very bad indeed. No changes in the Codex, not that I was really expecting any. It's a hover flyer that can move 20 inches, so definitely can engage the things that it wants to. It's just that when it gets there, its damage output tends to be really bad unless it can get into combat with something with the fly keyword. Out of its damage output, you get the choice between the Torrent auto-hitting Bale Flamer with a lower strength, or the Hades auto cannon for longer range, but far less hits. And then in melee, you get a bunch of attacks at strength 7, AP 1, damage 2, with anti-fly and devastating wounds, which does mean that if you do contact something with fly, it will do some big damage. I feel like it could genuinely be a pretty interesting unit with the right points cost. I suspect it will be paying a premium for how good it is against fly things, but at 205 points it's just far overcosted, very low damage for the cost, and only gets to be merely okay if you are against enemy fly units. I think its points cost would need to drop absolutely spectacularly for people to start taking them competitively. Finally, for the Daemon Engines, we've got the really big one in the Khorne Lord of Skulls, 450 points pre-Codex, and genuinely for the stat lines and being able to be buffed with Dark Pacts, that's really not bad for this. 24 wounds at toughness 13 with a 5 plus invulnerable save is sturdy enough. Las cannons and things will be wounding on a 5 plus, and then you get the choice between two really big guns. I feel like both the damage 3 ones are interesting, Skull Hurlers plus the Gore Storm cannon maybe. She'll make a mess of things like enemy Terminators and be pretty good against most anything else. Obviously the thing's absolutely immense in close combat, a big strength 16 damage 8 attack with the Great Cleaver of Khorne, and can swap it out to sweep to just massacre a bunch of Space Marines. It is a little bit slow though and will struggle to fit through gaps in terrain for plenty of boards. As with every other Daemon Engine here, again it's going to be good in the Soulforged pack. Being able to warp around terrain could genuinely be kind of game changing on certain boards for this. Never mind all the big damage buffs, and any stratagems that you can put on this guy with any of the detachments is going to be nasty. There's not actually very much that gets locked out of Titanic units, so he could be kind of good in certain ones like Veterans or the Renegades one. Certainly seems fun, though it's definitely a big all-in sort of strategy type unit. Could lose big if he gets taken down too easily with really big enemy anti-tank, or if the enemy's in the position to screen or ignore him all game. Lastly, for the vehicle type things, we've got transports and fortifications. The Chaos Rhino's as good as it ever is, 75 points for a fairly tough profile for that points cost, 10 wounds at toughness 9. It moves quite fast, can transport 12 models, has a bit of anti-infantry type fire and a firing deck, and self-repairs a bit when it gets damaged. It was often played in competitive lists before, no real criticisms as it's just a nice cheap unit to get your units to where they need to be and not dead. You can fit quite a lot of scary value in this with multiple legionary squads with characters or some chosen. Finally, we've got the Chaos Fortification in the Noctilith Crown, which I did think as one of the fortifications it maybe wasn't one of the absolutely most terrible out of them. It did have one good special rule, even if realistically there wouldn't be many competitive lists that would want to pay 125 points for a 4 plus invulnerable save. Seems that for some reason Games Workshop just wanted to utterly nerf this thing into the ground and still let you be able to field it though. It swapped out its Malevolent Locust rule for a leadership boost of all things. I guess admittedly it is more useful in Chaos Space Marines given that it could prevent some Dark Pact mortal wounds, and it could be a tough unit to help screen out the deployment zone a little bit and provide some of your units cover when they couldn't normally get it, but realistically no one's going to want to pay 125 points for a leadership buff for part of their army. It'd have to be ridiculously cheap for that kind of utility, and just taking any points away from dangerous units going forward just probably isn't the best idea. Finally, we get into the Chaos characters. We'll talk through the generic characters first and finish off with the epic heroes. The regular Chaos Lord on foot is a fairly topical model, seeing as he got a new sculpt in the Battle Force box that comes out along with the Codex. Seems that the war gear has slightly changed to represent that model, though given the options that it came with, there are only really two major changes. First up, Chaos Lords can't take bolt pistols anymore, instead you just get plasma pistols, I guess not the worst thing in the world, seeing as they're directly better. Still a bit weird though. And then you can take a few slightly funkier combinations of melee gear. If you want, you can swap out that plasma pistol for a power fist. So you could say have a demon hammer in one hand and a power fist in the other, and have the choice of both with how best to hit the enemy, depending on whether or not you want to hit on 2s or get devastating wounds. Probably isn't the biggest deal either way really. Plasma pistol shots are kind of fine but aren't really that much, and a little bit more melee flexibility isn't the worst either. Otherwise though, Chaos Lords have remained really quite competitive models for the entirety of 10th edition so far. They get their free battle tactics, which in the Pactbound can be good for the reroll wounds thing. And there are a bunch of other interesting battle tactics out there in other detachments now. There's a couple of the Armour of Contempt equivalents that could be quite nice to have on the front line. And then beyond that, he just adds a whole load of scary damage to his unit, getting his one chance for glory once per game, where he gets extra strength, attacks, AP and damage. That's still the same way it was, just taking him from being a fairly tame character to 6 attacks, strength 9, AP 3 and damage 3, which is a whole world of difference from his base stats. I guess in theory, if you manage to kill a unit with his squad and his attached squad, and then trigger that Pactbound Eye of the Gods type stratagem, then you could level up all his stats, and then double down on that with chance for glory later in the game. I guess you could get yourself to some very silly statistics on a Demon Hammer or Power Fist there. Otherwise, there's the Lord and Terminator armor. He was also on 95 points pre-Codex. He does have better stats, given that he has better durability and similar sort of melee power. In reality though, in the most important turn he's not going to be anywhere near as good as the Foot Lord in terms of fighting, as he swaps out that big once per game damage buff for halving damage to his model personally. He maybe could be interesting with that Bastion plate in a big chunky Terminator squad in the Fellhammer detachment. Feels like that could be an interesting and dangerous unit slogging its way up the board, laughing off all fire and using the 5+ feel no pain stratagem on them. Kind of a shame that that's not a battle tactic really. Moving on to some Psychers, and the standard Chaos Sorcerer is 60 points. No changes in the Codex for them. They're a 4 wound support character with a Smite type Infernal Gaze, a few force weapon attacks, and they get -1 to hit for their units, and a small chance to do some extra mortal wounds if the enemy fails a leadership test. Overall, kind of lesser played, -1 to hit, and a bit of shooting isn't nothing, but in general people seem to think that Lords added a lot more. The Terminator Sorcerer does have some other interesting options though. They get the Terminator stat line and the same sort of force weapon profile in melee. Their 2 buffs are a bit shifted. You get 2 reroll advance and charge rolls with him, and then his second rule is Death Hex. Roll a dice and on a 2+, you avoid taking mortal wounds, and then until your next movement phase, that enemy unit you've marked gets AP of attacks improved against them, so it could be quite a nice way to counter enemy cover or Armour of Contempt. I feel like that one is genuinely quite an interesting rule for supporting a gun line. It's just maybe a bit unfortunate that you need to commit an entire Terminator squad to doing so. I guess maybe could be interesting in the Iron Warrior style detachment, maybe with those bolts that ignore cover from things and then use Death Hex to get extra AP. You could go from something like an enemy Land Raider in cover with Armour of Contempt being almost unkillable to perhaps being surprisingly easy to take down with some high AP stuff. Next up, unfortunately, there was a nerf to the Master of Possession. I'd argue that perhaps one of the main reasons to take him has gone away, unfortunately. He used to give the unit a 6+ feel no pain that he was leading, but now he just simply doesn't. He just gets the other things that he had. Really quite a shame that one, as that was pretty big for making one big unit to possess significantly tougher, particularly against anything that could neatly kill 1 per shot with damage 3 weapons. Otherwise though, he still has his Psyker sniping attack with strength 6, AP 3 and damage 3, which is a pretty potent shooting attack to be fair. Wound Psychers on a 2+, and he can also use his sacrificial dagger thing to take a mortal wound on his own squad to add +1 to the hit and wound reroll to make sure that those attacks land home. Otherwise, instead of the 6+ feel no pain, he just has his previous rule adding +1 to advance and charge for the units, which definitely isn't too bad. Could be helpful in the Renegade's detachment where you might be able to advance and charge. Does seem like a downgrade for him though. I guess he could still be useful for getting enhancements in a big squad of Possessed if you like. It does feel like the shine has definitely been taken off both this guy and the Possessed themselves though. Losing a 6+ feel no pain and not getting the devastating wounds thing all game long just mean that they're less tanky and less dangerous overall. I feel like they've gone from being really quite interesting at 130 points to probably being a bit overcosted again unless they go down further. Next up, to preach to the faithful, we've got the Dark Apostle. He was 75 points before, coming with the main guy and the 2 Dark Disciples that could be used to tank a bit of damage where needed. Always helpful to have them being trying to bounce las cannon hits, given that they get a 4+ invulnerable save. The only change that he's had is that his battle shot cancelling rule at the start of a phase has been extended to 12 inches from 9, so a small buff there. But broadly beyond that, he does what he did before. +1 to wound in melee, which is alright for things like Legionaries' heavy melee weapons or Chosen, though in general people tended to go for the Chaos Lords over him for the most part. And he also gets that slightly fun rule where, if it makes sense, he could sacrifice one of his Dark Disciples to deal an extra mortal wound at the start of the fight phase. I guess that could be nice enough if it brings down the last wound on an enemy unit that was just about to hit you very hard, but otherwise they're quite nice just to have around to tank a bit of damage themselves. He is also Leadership 5 as well, which I guess helps a little bit, particularly with the Dark Pacts being a bit more dangerous and the Pactbound leadership test mattering more. Next, for a bit of techno-heresy, we have the Warpsmith. He was 70 points previously, and a pretty useful vehicle support character. He takes one of your vehicles and makes them hit on a 2+, healing D3 wounds on the same vehicle as they do so. Gets lone operative when he's near vehicles, which can be handy enough for standing at objectives, maybe doing actions and things. And does have a little bit of personal threat if the enemy gets close, a trio of different pistol tendril attacks, plus a little melee, and could curse enemy vehicles with a bit of battle shock if that matters, though most of the time it won't. The only change that he got in the Codex was losing access to his Forge Hammer thing. This one had a bit more strength, but now he just gets a generic Forge weapon. This one's gained anti-vehicle 4+, and strikes at strength 6, AP 2 and damage 2. Still useful enough if you just need a character to sit around and bear an enhancement while sitting in your own backfield and staying safe. He could be a pretty option for one of those command point farming ones. Next up, we've got the Lord Discordant on Hellstalker, which spent much of early 10th being overcosted for some reason. Looks like there's nothing changed on his core datasheet. Unfortunately, he hasn't got the vehicle keyword, which would have been a massive boon for the Soulforged pack. It really does feel like he should be one of the main events in that entire formation. I feel like they should have made some sort of way that he could either benefit from that or given him something else specifically useful for him. In any case, he remains a pretty big and tough sturdy character that can be shot directly, toughness 9 with 10 wounds and a 2+ save. He chooses between a Baleflamer or an autocannon, though I'd go for the Baleflamer as it's just a bit better really, and has a few different choices of damage 2 profiles in melee, the final choice being between a single Technovirus injector attack in close combat or probably the slightly better Magma Cutter at range. He still has his 2 different rules for debuffing enemy vehicles, potentially allowing your units to reroll wound rolls of 1 against that cursed vehicle, and having the chance to make one enemy vehicle either -1 to hit or a small chance not to be able to shoot. That could be disruptive if it ever does go off, but given that you're not even guaranteed to be fighting any vehicles if you're playing Tyranids or an on-foot army, it's just not very take-all-comers. Given no datasheet update, he will need to go down in points significantly before he'd be particularly good. I can't really see him getting much play if he stays the same. Next up, we've got the warp-sighted butcher that is the Master of Executions, a big angry Chaos Lord with a great big axe. He's got 5 attacks at strength 7, AP 2 and damage 2 to cut down the enemy's champions, all with devastating wounds and precision. His buff being some nice rerolls against enemies that are below starting strength, and more against enemies below half strength. For his points cost, he's not awful, but given that the standard Lord is just 15 points more and gets both the free stratagems and the massive turn of huge melee damage, I think it's hard not to jump up to that. He can make a big combo unit if you want to. You could put him in the same unit as a Chaos Lord, though I feel like in general he might be better off just going with more squads. Could be interesting, though would probably need to be a bit cheaper. Could be a cheap fighty character if you can't stretch to a Lord. Lastly, for the generic characters, we've got the big boys in the Heretic Astartes Demon Princes. The on-foot one pre-Codex was 165 points, unchanged in the Codex in any way. A fairly nice stat line at toughness 10 at 10 wounds and a 2+ save, and then a bunch of strength 8 attacks in melee where you can strike or sweep. They still get the Infernal Cannon for some heavy bolter style shots at range, and then the choice of different Chaos marks. The Khorne and Slaanesh ones maybe tended to be some of the more popular ones. Slaanesh for extra movement, and Khorne for extra strength to get him to strength 10 on that strike mode. The choice could matter a bit more for the Pactbound, given that the Slaanesh one allowed you to take the intoxicating elixir for the 5+ feel no pain, which is definitely the best option there, I think. Otherwise, he gets some built-in rerolls whenever he shoots or fights, and gets an aura called Dark Blessing, giving your Heretic Astartes infantry units cover. Maybe not the worst for some tanky Terminators marching up the board, perhaps in the Iron Warriors formation there. I do feel like there's a few enhancements that could be kind of good on him. Anything that makes raw damage or defense a bit better is generally kind of good on Demon Princes if they can take it. Otherwise, you've also got the option of him with wings. He's 180 points, so is a bit more. He gets to move faster with 12-inch movement, fly, and deep strike, and could be interesting with rapid ingress for that. There was a little bit less hard to take out with toughness 9, and trades out the special rules for other things. His exciting rule is demonic destruction. When he makes a charge move, for every wound that this demon prince has left, you roll 1 dice for each wound that the demon prince has left. For each 4+, you deal 1 mortal wound up to a maximum of 6. If you hit home with full health, there's a good chance that you get around about 5 or so. Pretty big if you can get him there safely. Maybe if you delivered him with rapid ingress. Again, could be nice with certain damage or defense enhancements. I thought that he might work quite well with the full rerolls within the enemy's board half 1 from the Renegades. I think he's a lot more usable than he was at 180 points. I thought he was overcosted before, really. Finally, we get into the epic heroes of chaos, starting with none other than man himself with Abaddon the Despoiler. 310 points pre-Codex, a big fighty character with 9 wounds at a 2+ save, the Talon of Horus for some good shooting, and then some ludicrously dangerous melee with a bunch of strength 14 damage 3 with devastating wounds, or swapping it out for an anti-horde mode. Unfortunately, the Despoiler did get a trio of nerfs in this codex, despite not being particularly standout before in my opinion. He was definitely strong, but maybe felt kind of fairly costed for 310 points, I thought. He has just lost a little bit now though. His Dark Destiny rule now no longer automatically farms a command point if you pass the leadership test. It has to be a leadership test of a 7+, not rolling a 2+ on a single dice after you've taken the test. That means it's dropped down from a 69% chance to get that CP to 58. His War Master's buffs, where he gets 3 different auras, either re-rolling hit rolls or giving a 4+ invulnerable save, or battle shock things. They can now no longer affect damned units, so not for the mere mortals. I guess that's mainly aimed at stopping them from getting his 4+ invulnerable save, which is surprisingly powerful on cultist type units admittedly. Otherwise, he lost his deity keywords, which will be bad news if you're trying to use the Pactbound formation still, so he won't be able to grant all the different boosted Dark Pacts to a Terminator unit, which could be kind of fun. Though this one won't matter at all if you're playing him outside of the Pactbound formation. Finally, he's got 1 side grade in that he can now lead Chosen but not lead Legionaries. That feels maybe a bit more appropriate leading the Elite of the Chaos rather than the rank and file. He does seem to fit quite well with them to be fair. Giving them 4 rerolls to hit is maybe a bit more helpful versus the Terminators who already get that built in when they do a Dark Pact. Could be a different option for a unit to charge into battle with, and he could get a scary unit of Chosen with him to charge out of a Land Raider. That does seem like a fairly terrifying if very high investment combo if you wanted to go all in there. Overall, it's still going to be an interesting datasheet. That full hit reroll can be pretty powerful with a Chaos Firebase, let alone anything else. He's definitely taken a few knocks in this update though. Otherwise, alongside him in the Black Legion is Harken Worldclaimer. He's a jump pack Black Legion character who can lead Raptors. He gets a Hell Spear that he can throw as a ranged attack with sustained hits D3, and then get a bunch of attacks with precision in melee, plus 1 extra attack with the Hell Spear with Lance. His special rules are to trigger a few more Battle Shock tests. He gets a little bit of Dread Talons flavour here, by making enemies within 6 inches test Battle Shock if they're below starting strength. That can occasionally be meaningful on objectives, and otherwise he has his Head Taker special rule, getting mortal wounds when his Raptor squad charges into close combat. That one's taken a similar sort of side grade to the Jump Intercessors with what they get. You now only roll that dice on a 4+ for each model that's actually made it into engagement range. It does mean that you're probably going to be a bit less likely to get quite so much out of it if you've got a big massed up Raptor squad with I guess 11 models including Harken. Still should be good for a fair few mortal wounds though, and might not affect things quite as much for a smaller unit. Next up, and Huron Blackheart lives and remains in the Codex. He was 80 points before, and I did think a little bit on the weaker side out of the characters, though it does feel like he's actually got a good detachment to go with now, though slightly awkwardly it's probably the Alpha Legion one as opposed to the Renegades one. He gets a heavy flamer, a choice of 2 different melee profiles, one of them being fairly good anti-space marine, an extra pip of objective control for his units, and a once per game reactive move that's handy enough to have around. Though it's only d6-inch movement, it's maybe not so much that you'd really plan around it too much. His good rule that works out well with infiltrating units though is his Red Corsairs one. This allows Heretic Astartes infantry units to redeploy after you've seen where everyone's set up. In that Alpha Legion detachment with a whole bunch of infiltrating things, that could be really big. Even if you don't know who's going first yet or who isn't, it could be potentially useful to put a whole bunch of legionary units somewhere threatening, but in a place where they're not going to get absolutely destroyed if the enemy goes first. With the big movement things from that Renegade's detachment, certainly feels like it could be possible to arrange that. Maybe a big scary legionary unit with an attached character. Have them start in the mid-board and threaten to advance and charge something important, and otherwise, if the enemy gets first turn, they'll be at least relatively safe behind terrain. Overall, nice that it's still here. I feel like it's probably going to be niche for most detachments beyond that though. Fabius Bile also remains in the Codex. I did see a couple of people speculating as to whether or not he would be running with the Emperor's children, though I honestly suspected probably not on balance given that he doesn't really tend to hang around with them very much anymore. His change in the Codex was that he can now lead the Accursed Cultist and the regular Cultist mob now, as well as the Chosen and Legionaries he could previously. That means he could be good for making them his enhanced warriors, +1 strength and +1 toughness. He has a few anti-infantry style pistol attacks, and then a Rod of Torment in melee, and just for a character he is surprisingly hard to take out, a 5+ feel no pain, reducing the damage of 1 attack for his lead unit down to 0 each turn, which is kind of guaranteed extra durability and could trigger multiple times per game, and then the chance for him to resurrect personally with the Chirurgeon, set back up at 4 wounds remaining for 1 more fight. Overall, I feel like he's not too bad as an all-rounder. He does often seem to get passed over for Chaos Lords with Legionaries or Chosen. I think he's quite good by his own stats though, and certainly seems like he could be alright with Accursed Cultists, even if they don't get the invulnerable save that a Dark Commune could bring. Cypher's one of the datasheets that got one of the most updates overall. He's the Chaos Lone Operative, dropping down to 90 points at the last balance update. In the Codex he kind of got massively more dangerous. Previously he had his bolt pistol and plasma pistol that he could fire out with 9 shots at range, quite good for messing up enemy infantry, but now he also gets attacks at basically that same profile in melee as well. 6 attacks with the bolt pistol, and then 3 more with the plasma pistol with the extra attacks rule. Between shooting and fighting, he could really easily kill an entire squad of Space Marines in 1 round. And with that bolt pistol, he's pretty good at making a mess of bigger units as well. That'll be 18 attacks in total with sustained hits for most of them. Otherwise, his Agent of Discord has been tweaked a bit, so it's no longer debuffing 1 battle tactic. Its enemy units within 12 inches will have to pay 1 CP extra to use battle tactics. Probably a little bit less useful overall, though situationally great. And he still gets his Guns Blazing special rule to return fire at enemies that shoot him or a unit within 3 inches, provided he can actually be in range to target them. That one's helpful for a bit of chip damage. He is only limited to doing that once per turn. Finally, it seems that since the index, he's also gained the Fallen keyword as well. Not sure if that's any sort of hint of things to come. I still think it'd be really quite cool for them to release a Fallen kill team at some point. Overall though, on an individual model basis he looks far better. It is a shame to lose that battle tactic debuff, but now I'd say is perhaps a surprisingly dangerous lone operative. Most lone operatives between shooting and melee don't have quite enough threats to be able to wipe out entire squads of medium infantry, but Cypher I think has a good shot. Finally, lastly, we have Vashtor the Arcathane, a really weak datasheet for the start of 10th edition, just being very underpowered, mainly in the damage department, though now he has got some significant buffs. It's gone from toughness 9 to toughness 10, so I think that's a fairly meaningful increase. With his 14 wounds and 2+ save, he is now genuinely at least kind of tanky if he stays at 190 points. But perhaps more importantly, his Vashtor's Hammer mode in close combat has gained a lot more damage. It went from a sort of pitifully bad Strength 9 AP1 damage 3 to a big Strength 14 AP2 damage 3, all with anti-vehicle and devastating wounds, so you get to ignore any saves on a 4+. He still has his Sweep mode, which increased to Strength 8, and his Claw attack with his Flamer type thing also gained anti-vehicle as well, so could chip off a wound or 2 there if he gets lucky. Otherwise, he still has its aura of +1 strength to friendly demon vehicle units nearby, which I think is okay, but it's only relevant when they're targeting certain things. Still doesn't really feel like a very exciting buffing rule compared with other things that might have been options. And otherwise he swapped out his vehicle debuffing rule for an interesting hazardous one. Basically, ranged weapons targeting him within 18 inches gain the hazardous ability, and that could actually be surprisingly problematic for some enemy units, causing a bunch of chip damage and mortal wounds if anything decides to destroy him up close. Overall, he's seen absolutely massive improvements. I'm still not sure if it'll be quite enough to see regular competitive play at that kind of points cost, but at least it's definitely moved in the right direction. Having at least a little bit more damage is quite a big deal. Overall, that's the detachments and the datasheets then. For first impressions, I think this is a pretty good codex compared with other 10th ones. There are certainly nerfs, and I'm sure people won't be happy about some of the datasheet changes there. Perhaps the most painful one being Cultist war gear. Not particularly nice to have models invalidated, though I think I'll probably try and make use of them as traitor guardsmen if you do have the models. I think most of the detachments are genuinely quite interesting. I was wondering whether or not they'd be kind of underwhelming versus the new version of Slaves to Darkness, just given how much value that added. I think maybe it wasn't the worst idea in the world to perhaps lessen the sheer value of that and then make that plus the other ones interesting. It does look like you could genuinely build forces in lots of different ways and they'd be interesting on paper, whether it's tough Iron Warriors, sneaky Alpha Legion infiltrating into the midfield, big damage and mobility things from Veterans or the Renegades, or the scary Daemon Engines from the Soulforged pack. Unless they cop some errata, which I feel like there's a good chance of, then Warp Talons are looking kind of obscene right now as well. Investing in a bit of rapid ingress, and you could have a scary unit that just deletes enemy units repeatedly one by one. Very nasty just to have them bouncing around while the rest of the army just does its thing. And otherwise, for datasheets, I quite enjoyed the improvements to Cypher and Vashtor. I think Cypher in particular looks really quite fun and dangerous to use right now. Obviously, all of the rest of the datasheets will need to be taken in context of points. I don't know how much they are going to change relative to the balance update points that we got recently. It might be that the vast majority of stuff stays the same, and that was kind of supposed to be aimed at broadly being the Codex points. We'll have to wait and see there. Let me know your initial impressions though. What sort of armies are you thinking about building now we know the rules for these? And feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics and stay tuned. I'll certainly cover the points update for the Codex when it's out, as per the digital rules for the Emperor's Children. In any case, thank you for listening. Feel free to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the 40k videos coming with new ones just about every day. I'll hopefully be doing a few more videos on the Chaos Codex, maybe a start collecting video and tier list and things, and perhaps delving into a couple of the detachments a bit more. Finally, if you'd like to help support the channel and keep all these videos coming, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support. Also, thank you for big videos. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.